Why you'd never survive a day in medieval times, to the countless nameless individuals who succumbed to dysentery, the Black Death, or simply the crushing weight of medieval existence. May your afterlife be significantly less unpleasant than your earthly one. This book is dedicated to you, not out of morbid fascination, but out of a grudging respect for your remarkable resilience in the face of staggering odds. You endured conditions that would curdle the very marrow of a modern-day human, and for that you deserve at least a slightly less bleak memorial than a hastily dug grave. Seriously, though, your lives must have been utterly awful. I mean, think about it. No indoor plumbing, questionable hygiene practices that make even a 21st century camping trip look like a five-star resort, and a medical system that would make a witch doctor blush. Let's not even talk about the food. While I wouldn't say I enjoy picturing the sheer volume of parasites lurking in your average medieval stew, the mental image does provide a certain morbid entertainment value, a sort of dark, historical slapstick, if you will. This isn't meant to be disrespectful. I genuinely admire your capacity to endure, adapt, and even occasionally find moments of joy within such a relentlessly grim environment. One can only imagine the sheer grit required to survive a single day, let alone a whole lifetime. It's a testament to the human spirit's tenacity that civilizations even manage to survive, much less flourish, under such brutal conditions. So, while this book might poke a little fun at the absurdities of medieval life, and believe me, there were plenty, it also aims to honor the remarkable resilience and adaptability of the people who lived through it all. Finally, a small nod to my own sanity, which has been tested repeatedly during the research process. The sheer volume of unpleasant information I've absorbed regarding medieval sanitation alone warrants some form of formal acknowledgement. So consider this dedication a thank you to both the deceased and my own mental fortitude for making it through the whole process relatively unscathed, or at least only slightly more cynical than usual. Chapter 1: A Day in the Life or Death. The air hung thick and heavy, a miasma of damp earth, decaying refuse, and something vaguely animalistic. This wasn't the gentle dawn chorus of birdsong. This was the dawn chorus of disease. Thomas cracked open an eye, the meager light filtering through the cracks in the wattle and daub walls, doing little to dispel the gloom. His nose wrinkled involuntarily. The smell was pungent, a blend of unwashed bodies, stale urine, and something distinctly rodent-like. He wasn't entirely sure what was worse, the smell, or the knowledge that the source of that something distinctly rodent-like was likely scurrying around inside the walls. Beside him, his wife, Agnes, stirred, her breathing shallow and ragged. Their youngest, a babe barely a year old, gurgled faintly, a sound barely audible over the incessant scratching and squeaking emanating from the walls. Rats. Everywhere, they were the unwelcome house guests, the ever-present companions in their cramped, dirt-floored dwelling. Fleas, tiny, bloodthirsty vampires feasted on them all, and lurking in the shadows, ever present, was the specter of the plague. Not a distant threat, a looming dread, but a tangible reality. The Black Death hadn't completely vanished. It lingered in the shadows, a patient predator waiting for its next opportunity. Their dwelling, one among many packed tightly together in the town, offered little in the way of comfort or sanitation. The thatched roof leaked whenever it rained, which in this damp climate was often, and the walls were perpetually damp. A single soot-stained window offered scant light and little ventilation. A meager fire in the hearth struggled against the chill morning air, offering a pathetic shield against the pervasive damp. Their possessions, a few chipped wooden bowls, a rickety table, and a worn straw mattress, were crammed into the small space, leaving barely enough room to move. The livestock, a scrawny goat and a couple of equally scrawny chickens, shared their living space, contributing generously to the overall aroma. It was a far cry from the sterile, sanitized comfort of modern homes. This was survival, raw and unfiltered. Their daily routine began not with a gentle morning stretch, but with a grim assessment of survival. First came the water, the well water, drawn from a source shared by countless others, was questionable at best. Thomas had learned to boil it before drinking it, a simple precaution that most villagers couldn't afford or didn't understand the necessity of. But even boiling didn't guarantee purity. Typhoid, dysentery, cholera, these were just the common foes. Then there was the food. Their meager store consisted of a few hard biscuits, a piece of stale cheese, and some withered vegetables. Hunting was a risky business. Poaching in the Lord's woods could lead to a beating, imprisonment, or even worse. Food scarcity was a constant companion. Agnes worried about feeding their children. Every day was a gamble. The thought of another famine haunted her. The children were already thin. She desperately tried to make their rations last. The very act of procuring food and water was a calculated risk. Every interaction with others carried the potential for infection. Every cough, every sneeze was a potential death sentence. The medieval world was a constant game of chance, where survival was a matter of luck as much as skill. The thought of death was never far from their minds. They had seen it too many times. Friends, family, neighbors, all claimed by illness, accident, or violence. The life expectancy was short. Many didn't reach adulthood. Each morning was a gift, and each day was a struggle. It shaped their perspectives. They lived for the small things. A sunny day, a bountiful harvest, a healthy child, all were precious, fleeting moments in a life lived on the precipice of death. Their children knew this reality. Their laughter was tempered by an unspoken fear, a quiet understanding that tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. The absence of modern medicine was a constant source of fear. Simple cuts and bruises could become deadly infections. Agnes had once nursed a neighbor through a bout of dysentery, using herbs and chants learned from her grandmother, a treatment that was as likely to harm as to help. She had seen the neighbor slowly waste away, weak and helpless, before succumbing to the infection. This grim experience was seared into her memory, the stark contrast between medieval helplessness and modern medicine's potent interventions painfully obvious. The concept of hygiene was almost entirely absent. Personal hygiene was minimal at best. Regular bathing was largely considered a dangerous practice, a belief born of an incomplete understanding of disease. The notion that cleanliness could prevent disease was unheard of. People were more likely to believe that miasmas, foul odors, were the primary cause of illness. Even the air itself was considered hazardous. Many people believed that bad air caused disease. The reality was grim. The close proximity of people and animals, coupled with the lack of sanitation, created an ideal breeding ground for disease. This environment was the perfect storm, a breeding ground for illnesses that swept through the population, leaving death and devastation in their wake. Even simple tasks like fetching water or collecting firewood carried a multitude of risks. The route to the well often passed through areas littered with human and animal waste. Every step was a potential encounter with parasites, bacteria, and viruses. The collection of firewood involved venturing into potentially dangerous areas, exposed to the elements and wild animals. This was not a romanticized vision of rustic simplicity. This was a life fraught with hardship, danger, and the constant threat of death. It was the mundane, the everyday, that was truly dangerous. It was the small risks, accumulated over time, that chipped away at their lives. Every day was a gamble, a constant test of survival. Every day was a day in the life, or death, of a medieval peasant. The ever-present threat of the plague cast its long shadow over every aspect of existence. The meager fire cast long, dancing shadows across the dirt floor as Agnes stirred the contents of a single, cracked pot. The aroma, if one could call it that, was a peculiar blend of burnt grain, slightly soured milk, and something vaguely earthy. This was breakfast, their breakfast, a far cry from the sugary cereals and fruit platters that graced modern tables. This was sustenance, plain and simple, a daily battle against hunger. The porridge, as it was generously termed, was a thin, grayish gruel made from leftover barley and a splash of the questionable well water. Agnes had salvaged a few scraps of slightly moldy cheese from the previous day, the rind hard and brittle, the interior a curious shade of green. She crumbled it into the porridge, hoping the heat would kill any lurking nasties. The reality, however, was that her hopes were slim. Even boiling the water wasn't a surefire method of sterilization in their rudimentary cooking pot. Thomas sat hunched on a three-legged stool, his face etched with worry lines that spoke volumes about years spent wrestling with hunger and hardship. He watched Agnes with an almost pained expression. The meager breakfast was a stark reminder of their precarious existence. Their faces were pale, reflecting the persistent shortage of essential nutrients. Their children's undernourished bodies were a constant source of anxiety for their parents. The children, two skeletal figures, whimpered, their stomachs rumbling like distant thunder. The youngest, still nursing, let out a feeble cry that echoed the deep-seated anxiety in the hearts of their parents. The oldest, a girl of 5, watched the porridge with wide, hungry eyes. Agnes broke off a piece of the hard, stale bread and gave it to the girl, a small piece of comfort in an otherwise bleak morning. The bread, a rough, dense loaf baked days ago, was nearly as hard as a stone. Chewing it was a significant exercise. Their breakfast was far from a feast. It was a matter of sheer survival, a desperate attempt to quell the gnawing hunger that threatened to consume them. This meager meal would have to sustain them until nightfall. The stark reality was that the porridge was a far cry from the concept of a wholesome, nutritious meal. The goat bleated impatiently, its eyes fixed on the pot. Agnes tossed it a small handful of barley, a gesture of appeasement that was more about keeping the animal alive than ensuring their own breakfast. This morning, the chickens seemed listless, their normal frantic pecking replaced by a lethargic stillness. Their eggs, so precious a source of nourishment, were scarce. A good harvest was the only salvation. A bad one foreshadowed a grim battle against starvation. The thought of starvation was a constant companion. It was a shadow that stretched its long fingers across every aspect of their lives, from the daily struggle to find food to their quiet whispers of fear during the night. The fear of starvation was not an abstract concept. It was a tangible menace, a gnawing worry that constantly threatened to overwhelm them. The meal was eaten in tense silence, punctuated only by the sounds of the children's chewing, the goat's restless movements, and the incessant scratching and squeaking within the walls. Each bite was a cautious act, savored not for its taste, but for its necessity. Even the smallest morsel was a precious gift. The act of eating was a grim reminder of their vulnerability. Thomas, between bites of the barley, glanced towards the window, his gaze lingering on the muddy, rutted lane outside. A few figures moved in the distance, figures that were both familiar and yet strange. His eyes had learned to detect the telltale signs of disease. Every cough, every stagger, every moment of hesitation sent shivers down his spine. The Black Death, the specter that had haunted their lives for so long, was a constant, ever-present fear. They had seen it claim countless neighbors and friends, and the memory was etched into their minds. Agnes, her face pale and drawn, spoke in a low, hesitant voice. "The harvest," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's thin this year." Thomas nodded grimly. He knew what she meant. A thin harvest meant less food, less opportunity. It meant hunger. It meant the chilling prospect of starvation. He looked at the children, and his heart clenched in his chest. Their survival depended on the bounty of the land, a cruel gamble played out every year. The conversation drifted towards the ever-present threat of food shortages. The lack of reliable food sources had shaped their lives in profound ways. They lived hand to mouth, their daily existence a delicate balancing act between securing enough food to survive and avoiding the dangerous consequences of poaching or theft. The contrast between their breakfast and a modern one was stark. No brightly colored cereals, no juices bursting with vitamins, no carefully prepared meals laden with nutrition. Their breakfast was a testament to the harsh realities of medieval life, a grim reminder of the lack of sanitation, the uncertainty of food supplies, and the constant threat of disease and starvation. Each morning began with a struggle for survival, a desperate battle against hunger, and a race against the ever-present shadows of the plague. The meager porridge, the hard bread, and the thin milk were not just food, they were a symbol of their lives. They were the grim reality of a time when survival was an extraordinary achievement. Their struggle wasn't just to find food, but to find enough to sustain life in a world where even breakfast was a precarious affair. Stepping out of Thomas and Agnes's hut was like stepping into a different world, or rather, a different dimension of hell. The air hung thick and heavy, a miasma of smells that assaulted the senses with a ferocity modern nostrils simply couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just the familiar stench of dung and decaying matter. It was a complex, multi-layered perfume of human waste, rotting vegetables, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present underlying aroma of disease. This wasn't just a town, it was a walking, breathing cesspool. The lane, if one could call it that, was little more than a rutted track of mud and compacted filth. It was impossible to walk more than a few steps without encountering a fresh pile of something unpleasant, be it human or animal. The uneven surface was a hazard in itself, treacherous underfoot, threatening twisted ankles or worse, the constant threat of falling into a particularly deep pothole, or worse, one concealing a hidden ditch carrying the town's effluent, made every step a calculated risk. Dodging stray animals, pigs rooting through discarded garbage, and chickens pecking at scraps added to the challenge, making the simple act of walking a perilous adventure. Open sewers, or rather open ditches, teeming with stagnant, foul-smelling water, snaked their way through the streets. These were not discreetly hidden. They were the very arteries of the town, carrying the city's waste directly through the heart of the community. The stench emanating from these channels was almost unbearable, a potent cocktail of decaying organic matter and who knows what else. Children played near them with a nonchalance born of familiarity, or perhaps a desensitization honed by years of exposure to such squalor. Their games were often interrupted by the sight of rats, fat and bold, scurrying across the muck and into the murky water, only to re-emerge with gruesome bounty, a grim reminder of the food chain at work. The buildings themselves leaned precariously, their timber frames warped and decaying. They were packed tightly together, leaving little room for light or air to circulate, creating pockets of stagnant, fetid air. The walls, where visible, were a mixture of mud, wattle, and decaying timber. The thatch roofs, perpetually damp, harbored a multitude of unwelcome guests, rats, fleas, and other vermin that thrived in the damp, dark environment. The constant dripping and leaking made many parts of the structures nearly impossible to keep dry or clean. Any attempt at cleanliness was immediately undone by the surrounding environment. The people were, perhaps surprisingly, not entirely unlike their modern counterparts. They were a mix of ages and professions, some engaged in their daily routines with a grim determination, others seeming to drift through life with an air of resigned acceptance. A cobbler hammered away at his work, his face shielded from the stench by a leather apron. A butcher, his hands stained a disconcerting crimson, hawked his wares from a stall laden with questionable meat. A woman, her face obscured by a tattered shawl, carried a pail of water, likely for cleaning, but the water itself seemed as dirty as the streets. The women would frequently be seen washing clothes, the water just as polluted, leaving one wondering if the clothes were even cleaner after that process. A group of children played a game in the streets, their laughter a stark contrast to the oppressive grimness of their surroundings. Their clothes were ragged and stained, their faces pale and thin, but their eyes still held a spark of life, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Even the children, despite their familiarity with the filthy environment, displayed a keen awareness of danger, instantly leaping back from the edge of a particularly pungent sewer channel. Their clothing offered little protection against the cold, the wet, or the ever-present filth. Layers of rough-spun wool and linen, patched and repatched countless times, offered little warmth and even less protection from the elements. Many were shoeless, their feet toughened by years of walking on the muddy streets. Their faces, often gaunt and pale, bore the marks of hardship and exposure. They were a resilient people, adapted to a brutal existence, yet they were always within a hair's breadth of starvation or disease. The women's faces spoke of years of ceaseless labor, caring for family and children while battling constant illness. They were hardened, yet carried a look of silent suffering. The conversations that drifted across the lane were a blend of mundane complaints and anxieties about survival. The price of bread, the state of the harvest, the latest victim of the plague, these were the topics that filled their days. Rumors, half-truths, and superstitions flowed as readily as the sewage. Their lives, far from being picturesque, were a constant struggle against hunger, disease, and the sheer brutality of their environment. One could easily imagine the plague in its many forms, hiding in the cracks and crevices of the buildings, dwelling in the putrid water, and lurking within the teeming hordes of vermin. Every cough, every sneeze, every limping gait held the potential for a deadly encounter. The death carts, with their mournful bells and ghastly loads, were a common sight. Their grim task was to collect the bodies of those fallen to the plague, their departure as anonymous as their lives. The experience was overwhelming, a brutal assault on the senses. The sheer volume of human and animal waste, the pervasive dampness, the constant threat of disease, and the ever-present dangers of violence were enough to make modern travelers gasp at the sheer volume of dirt that existed in everyday life. Their lack of sanitation was more than just unpleasant. It was a lethal weapon, a silent killer that claimed more victims than any sword or famine. The contrast with the sterile environments of modern cities, with their clean streets, their efficient waste disposal systems, and their advanced health care, was stark. The medieval town was not merely dirty, it was a breeding ground for disease, a testament to the fragile and precarious nature of life in a time before modern sanitation. The very act of survival demanded more strength, resilience, and tolerance than it does now. It was a constant, never-ending struggle. To walk through the medieval town was to glimpse a world where disease lurked around every corner, where a simple fall could lead to injury or even death, and where the line between life and death was impossibly thin. It was a world where survival itself was an extraordinary accomplishment. It was a world where even a stroll through town could be a fatal adventure. The experience, while horrifying, offered a sobering reminder of the progress that modern civilization has made, the progress which keeps modern citizens from having to live through the same struggles and difficulties that the medieval world faced. And while modern life might not be perfect, it's undoubtedly a far cry from that grim reality. The stench, already overwhelming, took on a new, acrid edge as we passed the apothecary's stall. Instead of the comforting aroma of herbs and spices one might expect, a pungent, almost sickly sweet smell permeated the air, a bizarre cocktail of dried plants, animal parts, and something indefinably off. This was medieval medicine, and it was far from the sterile scientific enterprise we know today. Forget gleaming labs and advanced technology. This was a world of bloodletting, leeches, and remedies that were more likely to hasten death than cure. The apothecary himself, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold the accumulated wisdom and perhaps the accumulated contagions of centuries, surveyed his wares with a knowing glint. His stall, a ramshackle affair leaning precariously against a crumbling wall, overflowed with a chaotic collection of jars, bottles, and sacks. Inside, various concoctions bubbled ominously, promising cures for ailments, both real and imagined. The ingredients, however, were less than reassuring. Dried herbs and roots, some identifiable, others decidedly not, lay alongside ground bones, pulverized gemstones, and what appeared to be the desiccated remains of various unfortunate creatures. Let's take, for example, the common ailment of what was likely a severe case of dysentery. The symptoms were unmistakable: violent diarrhea, excruciating stomach cramps, fever, and dehydration. In our modern world, such a condition would be treated with antibiotics and hydration, a relatively straightforward procedure. But in the medieval world, the very nature of the illness was poorly understood, attributed to imbalances in the humors, or perhaps the wrath of an angry deity. The apothecary, armed with his limited knowledge and a collection of decidedly questionable remedies, would likely begin with a thorough examination. This examination, however, would bear little resemblance to the scientific approach of modern medicine. Instead of stethoscopes and sophisticated diagnostic tools, the medieval physician relied primarily on observation, coupled with a liberal dose of guesswork and superstition. A careful study of the patient's complexion, pulse, and perhaps a quick assessment of their urine would inform their diagnosis. The treatment? The chances of surviving dysentery were slim and entirely dependent on the patient's constitution. In a time when starvation was commonplace and clean water was a luxury, the human body had a surprisingly robust immune response in many cases, though it came at a cost. Those who survived often were scarred, physically and mentally, by their experience, though it was not always a sure thing. For the less fortunate, death came swiftly. For those seeking the apothecary's help, the treatments would likely involve a combination of techniques aimed at restoring the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Bloodletting, a popular and often fatal procedure, was considered a way to remove excess blood and thereby restore balance. The process was far from sterile. A crudely sharpened tool, perhaps a lancet or even a rusty knife, would be used to make an incision, allowing the blood to flow freely. This was often performed in the middle of a dirty street or in the patient's squalid home, increasing the risk of infection. If bloodletting wasn't deemed sufficient, leeches might be applied. These slimy creatures were believed to suck out the bad humors, leaving the patient cleansed and purified. The thought in modern sensibilities is horrifying. However, they were often the best bet for any given treatment. Again, sanitation was hardly a consideration. The leeches were often kept in unclean containers and were unlikely to have been sterilized in any way. The risk of infection from this treatment was very real, often greater than the underlying condition it was intended to treat. Alongside bloodletting and leeches, a complex concoction of herbs, roots, and other ingredients would be prescribed. These potions, often foul tasting and smelling even worse, purported to possess various medicinal properties, though their efficacy was, to put it mildly, dubious. The ingredients themselves varied widely, ranging from seemingly innocuous herbs to toxic substances that could easily worsen the patient's condition. Beyond the concoctions, other treatments might involve purging, either through emetics to induce vomiting or through laxatives to encourage bowel movements. This further weakened the body, already struggling against the dysentery, leading to increased dehydration and overall exhaustion. The patient's diet would also be meticulously controlled, with a focus on foods believed to have specific properties relating to the humors. The problem with that, of course, was that often they were entirely wrong, especially considering that famine frequently ravaged the populace. A person already suffering from dysentery might find themselves forced to eat food that had no nutritional value, let alone any medicinal effect. The overarching lack of understanding about the causes of disease had several implications, most of which would seem counterintuitive to us today. It wasn't just a lack of diagnostic tools or treatments. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of how the human body functioned and how diseases spread. This limited understanding was coupled with a heavy reliance on superstition and religious explanations for illness. For example, the belief in miasmas, or poisonous vapors, played a significant role in shaping medical practices. The foul smells pervading the medieval towns were believed to be the direct cause of disease, an assumption partially correct, as the smells often indicated the presence of pathogens. However, the response to these miasmas often involved treatments that were not only ineffective, but actually harmful. The widespread presence of vermin, particularly rats and fleas, acted as vectors for disease transmission, but this connection was entirely unknown to the people of the time. Rats, freely roaming the streets and homes, carried diseases that could easily spread among the population, though there was no understanding of this complex chain of infection. The close proximity of humans and animals, coupled with the poor sanitation practices, simply added to the risk of infection and made for a perfect breeding ground for disease. This resulted in a high mortality rate. Disease was a constant threat, and even common ailments could easily prove fatal. A simple cut or scrape could easily become infected, leading to sepsis and death. The absence of antibiotics meant that even minor injuries could have severe consequences, and the unsanitary conditions only added to the problem. The lack of proper hygiene also contributed significantly to the spread of disease. Bathing was a rare occurrence, and clothing was seldom changed. Sewage was dumped openly into the streets, and the overall lack of sanitation created a breeding ground for a multitude of pathogens. The contrast with modern medicine is stark. We now possess the knowledge, technology, and resources to diagnose and treat a wide range of illnesses that were once almost invariably fatal. We understand the role of pathogens in disease transmission. We have developed advanced diagnostic tools, and we have created effective treatments that have dramatically reduced mortality rates. The lives of medieval individuals are painted with the grim reality of their circumstances. It wasn't just a matter of discomfort, it was a constant struggle for survival against an unseen enemy that stalked them from the darkness and the shadows, an enemy far more terrifying and deadly than any physical threat that they might encounter. Their world, while offering a glimpse into the human spirit's resilience, was nevertheless a world of constant peril, where even the most commonplace ailments could easily lead to a sudden and untimely end, a world starkly different from the world we inhabit today. This difference highlights not only the advancements in medical science, but also the fundamental improvements in sanitation and hygiene that have made a significant difference in the modern world, allowing us to appreciate the luxuries of contemporary life and understand the fragility of the lives led in previous eras. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the uneven cobblestones. A chill wind, carrying the stench of the nearby tannery and the faint, sickly sweetness of decay, swept through the narrow alleyways. The day, already harsh and unforgiving, was finally drawing to a close, but the respite it offered was meager, a brief pause before the darkness brought its own set of dangers. For Thomas and his family, living in a small, cramped dwelling, the sunset was not a moment of tranquility, but a signal of the increasing vulnerability of the night. Exhaustion clung to them like the clinging mud on their worn boots. Thomas, his body aching from a day spent toiling in the fields, slumped onto a crudely fashioned wooden stool. His wife, Ilara, her face etched with the weariness of tending to their children, and the household stirred a meager pot of broth over a sputtering fire. The broth, thin and watery, was their evening meal, a stark contrast to the elaborate feasts often depicted in fanciful tales of medieval life. Their two children, a boy of 6 and a girl of 4, clung to their mother, their eyes wide and reflecting the flickering firelight. They had witnessed their father's struggles throughout the day, the constant back-breaking labor under the relentless sun. They were growing accustomed to the hunger pangs that gnawed at their bellies. They also knew the ever-present anxiety that haunted their parents, the fear of illness, of starvation, of violence. The lack of safety was palpable. Their dwelling, little more than a collection of wattle and daub walls and a leaky roof, offered scant protection from the elements or from intruders. The flimsy wooden door, secured by a rusty latch, was a weak barrier against the darkness that held many unseen threats. In the world outside, violent crimes and random acts of aggression were common occurrences. Every night brought with it the potential for conflict, theft, or worse. As they ate, the conversation was sparse, punctuated by the sounds of the children's quiet whimpers and the crackling fire. The day's trials were recounted in hushed tones, each hardship adding to the weight of their collective burden. Thomas spoke of his encounter with a surly landowner, the dispute over wages unpaid. Ilara described how she had struggled to find clean water, her worries about the children growing increasingly evident. Their hushed tones showed their increasing fear of being overheard, for one never knew who might be listening in on a conversation. The constant fear of illness cast a long shadow. The memory of the recent outbreak of dysentery in their village hung heavy in the air. They knew that disease could strike at any time and with devastating consequences. The lack of sanitation made the streets and even their homes breeding grounds for disease. Their home, a far cry from the idyllic scenes depicted in fairy tales, was a testament to this reality. The daily struggle to obtain food was a constant reminder of their precarious existence. The meager broth before them was a testament to this constant battle for survival. There was little food stored away, barely enough to see them through the next few days. The crops, due to the unpredictable weather and the infestation of pests, had been poor this year. The looming threats of starvation was a constant companion, adding a fresh layer of stress to their already burdened lives. Their conversation turned to planning for the morrow, a process that was more a plea for assistance than an actual plan. The simple act of securing food for the next day was a massive undertaking. They were dependent on foraging for wild plants and hoping for the scraps and hand-me-downs provided by the better off people in their village, or occasionally purchasing items from their meager savings. Each task, from procuring water to tending to the children, became a race against time and fortune. Ilara's anxious gaze turned to the firelight reflecting on the walls. The shadows seemed to move, swirling like the restless thoughts that haunted her every waking moment. The thought of the children falling ill sent a chill down her spine. There was little they could do, save for prayer and the hopeful expectation that a miracle would occur. Thomas, recognizing the dread that gripped her, placed a comforting hand on her arm, but even that action felt small in the face of their hardships. As the flames began to die down, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, the night settled upon them, heavy with anxieties and uncertainties. The sounds of the night, the distant howls of dogs, the rustling of animals in the darkness, the creaking of their dilapidated house, only served to intensify their sense of isolation and vulnerability. Sleep offered a temporary reprieve, but it was a fragile truce in a constant battle for survival. Their dreams, filled with anxieties and the echoes of their day's struggles, were only interrupted by the rising of the sun the next morning. The cycle of hardship would begin anew. For those living in the medieval era, every sunrise presented not just a fresh start, but a renewed challenge. Each day was a contest against disease, hunger, and the inherent uncertainties of a world where the simplest act of survival required immense resilience, courage, and a degree of faith that seems unimaginable today. The simple act of survival in this era was an accomplishment in itself. Chapter 2: The Perils of Public Life. The stench hit Thomas first, a cloying blend of incense, sweat, and something indefinably rotten. It clung to the heavy woolen fabric of his tunic, insinuating itself into his very pores. He shielded his nose, a futile gesture against the pervasive aroma that permeated the air within the church of St. Jude. This wasn't the hallowed sanctuary he'd envisioned in childhood. It was more akin to a poorly ventilated stable with added religiosity. Ilara, clutching their children close, wrinkled her nose. The children, accustomed to the grime of their daily lives, were surprisingly quiet, their wide eyes absorbing the strange spectacle unfolding before them. The church, supposed to be a refuge, a place of comfort and spiritual solace, felt more like a potential breeding ground for pestilence. The service itself was a chaotic blend of chanting, coughing, and the occasional muffled cry. The priest, a gaunt figure draped in threadbare robes, mumbled prayers in a Latin Thomas barely understood. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own, mirroring the discomfort of the congregation. The The stained glass windows, depicting scenes of biblical piety, were cracked and dirty, offering a distorted view of the holy images within. Around them, the congregation was a tapestry of poverty and disease. People coughed incessantly, their faces pallid and drawn. Children cried, their whimpers lost in the drone of the chanting. The air hung thick and heavy, a palpable mix of human breath, unwashed bodies, and the lingering scent of decay. Despite the fervent prayers and the somber hymns, a profound sense of unease hung over the entire scene. Unlike the meticulously clean and sterile churches of the modern age, the medieval church was a microcosm of the societal problems it purported to address. It was a gathering place, certainly, but a place that offered little in the way of hygiene or sanitation. The stone floor, cold and damp beneath their feet, was littered with straw and the remnants of previous services. Rats scurried in the shadows, their tiny claws scratching against the ancient stones, a constant reminder of the omnipresent threat of disease. Thomas found himself comparing this scene to the romanticized depictions of church life he'd seen in illuminated manuscripts. Majestic cathedrals, soaring arches, elegantly robed clergy. The reality was far less glamorous. This was a far cry from the modern churches he might have pictured from stories, clean, bright, and well maintained. The contrast highlighted just how vastly different the societal approach towards faith and sanitation was in this period compared to modern times. The concept of hygiene as we understand it today was largely absent. People, often dressed in layers of worn-out clothing that harbored dirt, lice, and other parasites, sat closely together in the cramped space. The lack of personal hygiene, compounded by the lack of ventilation, made for a potent brew of airborne illnesses. The church was a place where the living mingled with the deceased. The smell of decay was not simply an olfactory nuisance, but a constant reminder of mortality. Funerals were often held within the church itself, and the proximity of the living to the recently deceased added another layer of vulnerability to the already precarious health of the congregation. This was a stark contrast to the segregated burial practices of the modern era. The irony was palpable. A place of worship dedicated to life, hope, and salvation also served as a breeding ground for disease and death. The inherent contradiction wasn't lost on Thomas. He observed the priest, who despite his best efforts, seemed to cough as frequently as the rest of the congregation. The sanctity of the building was hardly apparent through the constant reminders of mortality. The prayers for healing felt somewhat ironic, given the pervasive threat of disease. The church's role in disease management, or rather the lack thereof, was equally telling. There was little understanding of the causes and spread of infection. Medieval medicine was a chaotic mix of superstition, herbal remedies, and bloodletting. The church, far from being a source of effective public health measures, often perpetuated harmful practices and beliefs. While the clergy often played a role in tending to the sick and burying the dead, their efforts were often hindered by a lack of understanding and limited resources. The church itself could easily become the locus of an epidemic, turning the sanctuary into a deadly trap. Thomas watched as a child near him began to cough violently, his small body racked with tremors. Ilara instinctively pulled their children closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. The scene was both horrifying and strangely commonplace, a stark reflection of the harsh realities of life during this era. The church, in its grandeur and spiritual significance, existed as a stark contrast to the practical realities of medieval existence. It was a place where both hope and fear coexisted. The faithful sought solace, while the disease lurking in the very air they breathed was a constant threat. As the service drew to a close, Thomas and Alara slipped out into the chilly air, leaving behind the echoing chants and the lingering stench of incense and decay. The experience left them feeling not purified or renewed, but rather dirtier and more vulnerable than ever before. The church, in this instance, had served neither as a sanctuary nor a source of solace, but as a chilling reminder of the perils that lurked everywhere in their lives, even within the walls of a sacred place. The juxtaposition of the sanctity of the church and the grim reality of illness and death served as a sobering commentary on medieval life and highlighted just how precarious the balance between life and death was for the common person. Even the solace sought within the walls of the church was no guarantee against the omnipresent threat of disease and death. And so they navigated back towards their own small dwelling, knowing that the next sunrise would bring with it not only the promise of a new day, but a renewed struggle for survival. The chill air of the late autumn morning offered little respite from the oppressive atmosphere of the marketplace. Stepping from the relative quiet, or perhaps merely the different kind of quiet, of St. Jude's, Thomas and Alara were immediately overwhelmed. A cacophony of sounds assaulted their ears, the insistent hawking of vendors, the bleating of sheep penned precariously close to overflowing baskets of produce, the sharp cries of children lost in the throng, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing from a nearby stall. The visual assault was even more intense. A riot of colors and textures exploded before them. Piles of brightly dyed fabrics, mountains of glistening fish laid out on makeshift stalls, baskets overflowing with root vegetables, muddied carts piled high with sacks of grain, and the glistening, almost iridescent sheen of newly minted coins exchanged in hurried transactions. The air itself was a thick, choking soup. The stench of rotting fish mingled with the sweetness of ripe fruit, the acrid tang of wood smoke, and the pervasive, ever-present odor of unwashed bodies. Splashes of urine and animal dung stained the uneven cobblestone streets, while a haze of dust and smoke hung perpetually in the air, a testament to the bustling activity and the lack of any semblance of modern sanitation. It was a feast for the senses, undeniably, but a feast laced with the bitter taste of potential peril. Ilara clutched her children tighter, her eyes darting nervously from one potential hazard to another. Thomas, despite his attempts to maintain a stoic exterior, felt a prickle of unease. He had read accounts of medieval marketplaces, of course, but nothing in the dusty tomes could truly capture the raw, visceral intensity of the experience. It was a far cry from the sterile, climate-controlled aisles of a modern shopping mall. Here, there was no carefully curated environment, no piped-in music, no polite cashiers. Here, survival was a constant negotiation. The marketplace was a sprawling labyrinth of stalls and makeshift shops, each a microcosm of its owner's skill and ambition. A wizened old woman with eyes as sharp as flint sold herbs and remedies, her cryptic pronouncements a blend of ancient folklore and pragmatic knowledge. Nearby, a burly butcher expertly hacked at a carcass, blood staining his apron and the cobblestones beneath his feet. The aroma of raw meat hung heavy in the air, attracting swarms of flies that buzzed incessantly around the stall. Further on, a nimble fingered weaver displayed his wares, fabrics of exquisite craftsmanship that would likely adorn the wealthiest members of society, a stark contrast to the rough spun wool worn by the majority. The social dynamics of the marketplace were as complex as its smells and sounds. Bargaining was the lifeblood of the exchange, a ritualistic dance of haggling and negotiation. Vendors, often shrewd and quick-witted, employed a variety of tactics to entice customers and drive up prices. Customers, equally resourceful, employed their own wiles, often working in groups to secure the best deals. Social status, wealth, and even physical strength played a role in determining the outcome of each transaction. The atmosphere was both competitive and cooperative, a testament to the intricate social fabric of the medieval community. The risks, however, were ever present. The proximity of animals to food posed a constant threat of contamination. Diseased animals, indistinguishable from their healthy counterparts, could easily spread infection through their meat and droppings. The lack of refrigeration meant that food spoiled quickly, increasing the risk of food poisoning and other ailments. The open sewers and overflowing waste further aggravated the situation, breeding diseases that easily spread through the crowded spaces. The absence of any system for regulating weights and measures compounded the problems. Unscrupulous vendors could easily cheat their customers, either through underweight goods or cleverly manipulated measurements. There was no consumer protection agency, no standardized labeling, no guarantee of product quality. Trust was a precious commodity, often earned only through repeated interaction and the establishment of strong social bonds. A stranger in the marketplace was a gamble, their trustworthiness unknown, their motives hidden. Violence was another ever-present threat. Arguments over price, disputes over territory, or simple acts of theft were not uncommon occurrences. The marketplace often served as a stage for displays of physical prowess, with strong men settling their disagreements through fistfights or even more brutal means. The law often had little influence within the confines of the bustling market. The authorities were more focused on collecting taxes than maintaining order. Self-reliance, vigilance, and a keen understanding of social dynamics were essential for survival. Thomas and Alara navigated the crowded streets cautiously, their eyes constantly scanning for dangers, both obvious and hidden. They carefully examined the vegetables before purchasing them, seeking any sign of rot or infestation. They avoided the overflowing gutters and the densest crowds. They negotiated carefully with each vendor, aware that even a minor disagreement could escalate into a full-blown conflict. Their every move was a calculated risk, a testament to their understanding of the inherent perils of their daily lives. The experience left them exhausted, but also oddly invigorated. The energy of the marketplace was infectious, a potent mix of human ambition resilience, and a strange, almost exhilarating sense of danger. It was a world where life hung precariously in the balance, where every transaction, every interaction held the potential for both reward and ruin. Returning home, laden with their meager purchases and their experiences, Thomas and Alara couldn't help but reflect on the vast chasm that separated their lives from the relative safety and comfort of the modern world. The comparison between the medieval marketplace and a modern shopping mall was stark. The carefully controlled environment of a modern mall, the security guards, the clean floors, the abundant lighting, the organized displays, the easy access to clean water and restrooms, stood in stark contrast to the chaotic, disease-ridden environment of the medieval marketplace. The standardized weights and measures, the product labeling, the consumer protection laws all served as a reminder of the massive advancements in societal organization, public health, and consumer rights. The absence of such protections in medieval times underscored just how precarious and unforgiving life was for the ordinary people navigating the daily grind of survival. The very survival of individuals in the medieval marketplace depended on a delicate interplay of shrewdness, resilience, and an understanding of the unwritten rules governing this chaotic microcosm of medieval life. The marketplace was not simply a place for commerce. It was a battleground, a proving ground where the strong survived and the weak perished. It was a stark, unromantic reality that underscored the fundamental differences between medieval and modern life, a difference that extended far beyond the mere presence or absence of technological advancements. It was a difference in the very fabric of society, a difference in the understanding of risk, safety, and the human cost of daily living. The experience underscored the incredible strides society has made towards ensuring safety, security, and public health. It was a visceral reminder of the fragile balance between life and death, a balance far more precarious in medieval times than it is today. And as Thomas and Alara settled into their humble home, the echoes of the bustling marketplace, its smells, sounds, and dangers lingered, a testament to the harsh realities of a bygone era and a sobering reminder of the luxuries of modern life. The lingering scent of wood smoke and decaying fish clung to Thomas and Alara's clothes long after they'd left the marketplace, a grim souvenir of their foray into the heart of medieval life. The chaotic energy of the marketplace, however, was nothing compared to the chilling predictability of medieval justice. While the marketplace was a chaotic arena where survival depended on cunning and resilience, the legal system, if it could even be called that, was a blunt instrument, wielded with little regard for fairness or due process. Their journey home took them past the town's pillory, a crude wooden structure that stood as a stark reminder of the community's preferred methods of dispensing justice. A man, his face contorted in a mask of pain and humiliation, was fastened to it, his body swaying slightly with each gust of wind. A small crowd had gathered, a mixture of morbid curiosity and quiet satisfaction etched on their faces. Some hurled insults, others tossed rotten fruit, their actions fueled by a potent cocktail of resentment and a deeply ingrained belief in the power of public shaming. This wasn't a courtroom drama. This was a public spectacle, a grim theater where the community enacted its own brand of rough justice. The man's crime? Stealing a loaf of bread. Ilara had overheard someone whisper, a desperate act driven by hunger in a land where scarcity was the norm. The punishment, deemed fitting by the local authorities, was hours of public humiliation, exposure to the elements, and the merciless judgment of the onlookers. There was no trial, no lawyer to defend him, no judge to weigh the evidence. His guilt was assumed, his punishment predetermined. This was justice medieval style, brutal, arbitrary, and undeniably inefficient. The notion of innocent until proven guilty was a concept utterly foreign to this era. Accusations, often fueled by hearsay, rumor, or personal vendettas, were sufficient grounds for punishment. The burden of proof rested not on the accuser, but on the accused, a nearly impossible task given the limited legal recourse available to ordinary people. Confession, often extracted through torture or the threat of it, was considered the ultimate proof of guilt, regardless of the veracity of the statement. The lack of a formal legal system meant that power was often wielded arbitrarily, with the wealthy and influential enjoying an almost complete immunity from prosecution, while the poor and powerless were subject to the whims of local authorities or powerful landowners. Consider the case of a farmer accused of poaching on a lord's land. His fate rested not on evidence or legal procedure, but on the whim of the landowner. A simple accusation, coupled with the threat of violence or imprisonment, would be enough to ensure his compliance, or worse, his silence. The landowner, operating outside the constraints of formal legal frameworks, had the power to inflict punishments ranging from fines and floggings to exile and even death. There were no appeals, no checks and balances, no guarantee of due process. Justice, in this context, was a reflection of power dynamics, not a pursuit of fairness. Even when a formal court was involved, often a highly irregular affair presided over by a lord or church official with limited legal training, the process was far from impartial. Evidence was often unreliable, hearsay freely accepted, and the accused seldom had the resources or expertise to mount a defense. Trial by ordeal, a practice that relied on divine intervention to determine guilt or innocence, was a common feature of medieval justice. These ordeals, often involving fire, water, or combat, were far from reliable indicators of truth and frequently resulted in the death or severe injury of the accused, regardless of their guilt. The absence of a codified legal system, a standardized set of laws, and a trained judiciary resulted in a chaotic landscape where justice was inconsistent, biased, and often brutal. Local customs and traditions played a significant role in determining the nature of punishments, leading to a wide variation in legal practices across different regions and communities. What was considered a heinous crime in one village might be a minor offense in another, leading to a bewildering lack of consistency in legal outcomes. This unpredictable nature of medieval justice added another layer of instability and danger to an already precarious existence. The contrast between medieval and modern justice systems is striking. Modern legal systems, for all their flaws, are built upon the principles of due process, the presumption of innocence, and the right to a fair trial. Evidence is rigorously examined, legal representation is available to all, and appeals processes exist to ensure that miscarriages of justice are addressed. While the modern legal system is certainly not perfect, it represents a significant advancement over its medieval counterpart, one that reflects the evolution of human understanding of justice, fairness, and human rights. In the medieval period, the concept of individual rights was rudimentary at best. The rights of the individual were often subservient to the needs of the community, the church, or the ruling class. The state was not a neutral arbiter of disputes, but a participant in the process, often wielding its power to maintain order and consolidate its authority. The very notion of a citizen possessing legal protections was often non-existent. Individuals were subjected to the whims of those in power. The lack of a formal, codified system of laws created a fertile ground for abuse and corruption. Imagine being accused of witchcraft, a crime that could be based solely on rumor, suspicion, and societal prejudice. Your trial, if it could even be called that, would likely involve accusations, torture, and ultimately a biased verdict. The outcome would depend not on evidence, but on the prevailing superstitions and fears of the community. Your life, your property, your very dignity would be utterly at the mercy of those in power. Such events were not merely hypothetical, they were tragically commonplace in many medieval societies. The lack of a robust legal framework meant that individuals had little protection against false accusations, biased judgments, and arbitrary punishments. The medieval justice system, therefore, wasn't just inefficient, it was profoundly unjust. It was a system that mirrored the inequalities and power dynamics of the era, with its brutality and capricious nature serving as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities of the ordinary person. The lack of a clear legal framework, the absence of due process, and the prevalence of brutal punishments highlight the profound differences between medieval and modern conceptions of justice. It was a world where survival often depended not on legal protection, but on social connections, influence, and sheer luck. The comparison underscores the immense progress societies have made towards ensuring fair and equitable treatment under the law, a progress that is deeply ingrained in the very fabric of modern societies. As Thomas and Alara reflected on their experiences, the juxtaposition of the marketplace's chaotic energy and the chilling predictability of medieval justice served as a powerful reminder of the vast chasm that separated their world from the relatively safer, more just, and certainly more humane world of the present. The memory of the man in the pillory, his suffering a stark testament to the brutal inefficiency of medieval justice, would forever serve as a cautionary tale. The stench of death hung heavy in the air, a miasma thicker than the swirling dust kicked up by marching feet. Thomas pressed against the muddy rampart, gagged. It wasn't just the rotting corpses scattered across the battlefield. It was the pervasive smell of disease, of dysentery and typhoid, clinging to the very fabric of existence like a malevolent shroud. This wasn't the glorious spectacle of chivalric warfare romanticized in songs and tapestries. This was a gruesome, visceral struggle for survival, where the odds favored neither courage nor skill, but sheer brutal luck. Ilara, her face pale beneath the grime, clutched a makeshift bandage to a bleeding wound on her arm. The siege of Oak Haven had stretched on for weeks, a relentless attrition of nerve and flesh. The air vibrated with the constant drone of siege engines, the rhythmic crash of rocks against stone, and the sporadic shriek of men dying in agony. The battlefield was a landscape of shattered wood and crumbling brick, littered with broken weapons, discarded shields, and the remnants of human lives. This wasn't a finely choreographed dance of death. It was a chaotic melee of flailing limbs, clashing steel, and desperate cries. Knights, their shining armor dented and stained with blood and mud, fought alongside common soldiers armed with crudely fashioned weapons. The lines blurred between combatants and civilians caught in the crossfire. Women and children, their faces etched with terror, huddled in the scant cover provided by the shattered buildings, their screams swallowed by the cacophony of war. The scene was a far cry from the idealized depictions of medieval warfare often portrayed in popular culture. Forget the noble knights on their majestic steeds, engaged in glorious one-on-one duels. This was a brutal, close-quarters fight, a chaotic struggle for survival where strategy often yielded to blind panic. The battlefield was a terrifying place where death came swiftly and without warning, from a stray arrow, a bludgeon to the head, or the crushing weight of a collapsing wall. Sanitation was a distant dream, a luxury lost in the chaos and desperation. Excrement and refuse mingled freely with the blood and gore, creating a breeding ground for disease. The bodies of the dead, left unburied or hastily tossed into shallow pits, became incubators for infection. The air itself seemed to carry the seeds of death, infecting the living with a grim inevitability. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera stalked the battlefield, often proving far more deadly than the weapons of war themselves. The sheer mortality rate was staggering. Soldiers perished not only from wounds inflicted by enemy weapons, but also from diseases, starvation, and exhaustion. The survivors were often left with permanent injuries, both physical and psychological. Many limped through life with maimed limbs, missing eyes, or chronic infections, while others carried the invisible scars of trauma, haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. Modern warfare, with all its technological advancements, still claims countless lives, but the nature of death, the scale of suffering, is vastly different. Modern medical technology allows for the treatment of injuries that would have been fatal in the medieval period. Modern sanitation practices minimize the spread of disease, and evacuation procedures help to get the wounded away from the battle zones, allowing them to receive better medical attention. The sheer scale of destruction, though still enormous, is also contained in different ways. Though battles can be huge and deadly, the sheer numbers of people present at such deadly events does not exceed what could be seen in an average siege in the medieval world. The very way we understand war, the way we plan, strategize, and prepare for it, is fundamentally different than what the medieval world experienced. The contrast between the medieval battlefield and a modern conflict underscores the immense progress made in warfare technology and tactics. The introduction of firearms, explosives, and sophisticated weaponry has revolutionized warfare, significantly reducing the reliance on brute force and hand-to-hand combat. Modern military strategies emphasize maneuverability, precision strikes, and the use of advanced technology to minimize casualties. Modern conflicts, while still horrific, are fundamentally different from the brutal, close quarters fighting of the medieval era. However, the psychological toll of war remains a constant, regardless of era. The trauma of witnessing violence, the loss of comrades, and the constant threat of death leave enduring scars on the human psyche. In the medieval period, soldiers and civilians alike faced the overwhelming psychological impact of war without the benefit of modern psychological therapies or support systems. The widespread trauma associated with medieval warfare had profound implications for society, leading to increased rates of mental illness, social instability, and a general climate of fear and anxiety. The echoes of Oakhaven's siege lingered long after the fighting ceased. The town lay in ruins, a testament to the destructive power of war. The survivors, haunted by their experiences, struggled to rebuild their lives in the shadow of their losses. The landscape itself was scarred, the land littered with the remnants of a brutal conflict, a stark reminder of the human cost of war. Thomas and Alara, their clothes still carrying the grim scent of death and decay, knew that the scars of the siege would forever remain, etched into their memories, a somber testament to the unrelenting brutality of medieval life. The experience served as a chilling reminder that while the tools of war have evolved, the fundamental human cost remains brutally unchanged. The human cost of war is constant and inescapable. The only thing that changes is the tools employed to carry out this gruesome work. And even the tools are less efficient than one would think, as evidenced by the sheer scale of destruction in the medieval age and the continued human cost of modern warfare. Sleep, that elusive balm for the weary soul, was a luxury rarely afforded to the medieval townsperson. Forget the gentle lull of a modern bedroom. Imagine instead a cacophony of sounds assaulting your senses, a symphony of discomfort that would make even the most seasoned insomniac long for a pair of earplugs. The walls of your humble dwelling, likely constructed of wattle and daub or rough-hewn timber, offered little protection from the din of the night. The incessant bleating of sheep, the raucous cries of drunken revelers spilling from a nearby tavern, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing in the distance, all combined to create an auditory assault that defied restful slumber. Add to this the occasional shriek of a terrified woman, the roar of a sudden fire, or the guttural shouts of a nighttime brawl, and the odds of a peaceful night's rest dwindled significantly. But the noise was only one facet of the medieval sleeplessness equation. Sanitation, or rather the lack thereof, played a crucial role. The streets, a chaotic jumble of mud, refuse, and animal waste, served as a breeding ground for disease-carrying vermin. Rats, the size of small cats, scurried through the alleys, their unnerving squeaks a constant reminder of the unsanitary environment. Flies buzzed incessantly, their presence a harbinger of disease and decay. The stench of rotting garbage, human excrement, and stagnant water permeated the air, creating an olfactory experience that would leave modern noses revolting. Even within the confines of your own dwelling, the pervasive smell of unwashed bodies, damp earth, and decaying food provided a less than ideal ambiance for sleep. Security was another significant factor that undermined the possibility of a good night's sleep. The absence of adequate street lighting and the prevalence of petty crime, if not outright violence, made nighttime travel exceptionally dangerous. The threat of burglary, assault, or even murder was a constant, ever present reality that kept the townsfolk on edge. The sound of footsteps outside your door could trigger a surge of adrenaline, transforming a potential neighbor into a potential assailant. The feeling of vulnerability was pervasive, intensifying the anxiety that already gnawed at the edges of daily life. You slept not to rest, but in a state of constant, low-level alert. And then, of course, there was the ever-present threat of disease. The Black Death, with its horrific toll, served as a potent reminder of the fragility of life. Even without a pandemic, the medieval period was a time of high mortality due to endemic illnesses such as typhoid, dysentery, and cholera. The symptoms of these diseases, fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and agonizing pain, would disrupt even the deepest sleep, transforming nights into periods of agonizing discomfort and fear. The thought that a simple cough could be the prelude to a lingering illness, potentially leading to a painful, protracted death, cast a long shadow over the act of simply trying to fall asleep. Unlike modern times, where the comforting darkness of our bedrooms offers a sanctuary from the outside world, the medieval home was intimately connected to its surroundings. The thin walls provided little insulation, either against the cold or the noise. The constant presence of vermin, the ever-present threat of fire, and the knowledge that death could come knocking at any moment all contributed to a climate of anxiety that made sleep a distant, unattainable dream for many. If you were lucky enough to fall asleep, it was often a fitful, restless slumber punctuated by fits of anxiety and sudden awakenings. The dark recesses of the night held not only the promise of rest, but also the potential for disaster. The contrast between medieval sleep and the experience of a modern night is stark indeed. Today, we take for granted the safety, comfort, and sanitation that allow us to sleep soundly, unaware of the dangers lurking just beyond our bedroom doors. Our homes, equipped with modern technology and infrastructure, provide a sanctuary from the world outside. Central heating, comfortable beds, and effective pest control transform the nightly experience into a period of restorative rest rather than an exercise in anxious survival. We can sleep in peace, largely insulated from the sounds and smells of the outside world, secure in the knowledge that emergency services are just a phone call away. But the medieval townspeople knew no such peace of mind. Their sleep was a constant negotiation with danger, disease, and discomfort. The lack of sanitation, the threat of violence, the ever-present risk of disease, all contributed to a sleep-deprived population, perpetually existing in a state of low-grade anxiety. The psychological impact of this constant state of alertness was profound. The lack of restorative sleep had far-reaching effects on the physical and mental health of the population, impacting their work capacity, their immune systems, and their overall well-being. Modern studies have shown the negative impact of sleep deprivation on mental health. Imagine this effect compounded over centuries, where sleep was not a matter of choice, but a daily struggle for survival. The value we place on sleep today is a reflection of this hard-won understanding of its importance. We understand that sleep is essential for physical and mental health, a biological necessity for our survival and well-being. This knowledge, gained through centuries of scientific research and technological advancement, has transformed the way we live our lives. Our modern approach to sleep prioritizes its importance, recognizing its essential role in our overall well-being. We actively work to improve sleep quality, creating environments conducive to rest, and utilizing technology to track and improve our sleep cycles. In contrast, the medieval understanding of sleep was far more simplistic, largely shaped by superstition and a lack of understanding of the body's physiological needs. The idea of a good night's sleep would have been a distant concept, overshadowed by the grim realities of their daily lives. A poor night's sleep might be attributed to witchcraft, an angry spirit, or simply bad luck, all outside of their control. It wasn't something to be optimized, but rather an event that simply happened or didn't. The consequence of this lack of understanding was a society plagued by exhaustion, ill health, and a general susceptibility to illness and injury. The comparison between medieval and modern sleep highlights the profound advancements that have been made in creating a safer, healthier, and more comfortable world. While we continue to grapple with sleep disorders and the pressures of modern life, we enjoy a level of security and comfort that our medieval counterparts could only have dreamed of. The quiet darkness of our bedrooms, a silent sanctuary from the outside world, is a testament to the progress of humanity, a quiet privilege that should never be taken for granted. The ability to rest soundly is a testament to our collective efforts in creating a world where sleep is not merely a matter of luck, but a fundamental right. The very act of sleeping soundly in modern society reflects the successes of humanity, highlighting not only the advancements in technology, but also in social structures that support individual health and well-being. This quiet comfort, this ability to rest without fear, is a powerful symbol of just how far we have come and how much we have learned about our bodies, our environment, and the critical need for a good night's rest. It is a luxury, a right, and a testament to progress. Chapter 3: Medieval Misconceptions. Let's face it, the image of the medieval night is a bit of a mess, a glorious, romanticized mess. Hollywood, literature, and even our own collective imagination have conspired to create a chivalric fantasy that bears little resemblance to the gritty reality. We picture shining armor, valiant steeds, and noble deeds performed with unwavering honor. The truth, however, is far less glamorous, often downright messy, and occasionally hilarious in its absurdity. The reality was frequently a far cry from the romantic ideal, a cocktail of brutal violence, political maneuvering, and a surprising lack of personal hygiene. Consider the armor, for instance. Those gleaming suits of plate armor, so meticulously crafted in our cinematic visions, were, in fact, incredibly cumbersome and expensive. Not every knight could afford them. Many relied on simpler, less protective mail, or even just padded jackets. Imagine the sweaty, uncomfortable experience of wearing several layers of metal, particularly during a summer battle in the sun. And forget about gracefully dismounting a horse. That was a precarious and potentially dangerous undertaking, often requiring assistance. The romanticized idea of the nimble, effortlessly elegant knight is a far cry from the reality of a man struggling to move, see, and breathe in his suit of armor. Then there's the battlefield. Hollywood often portrays epic clashes of armies where heroic knights duel individually, showcasing their unmatched skill and prowess. The reality was frequently far less organized and far more chaotic, a gruesome and terrifying mess of close quarters, combat, screams, and the stench of blood and sweat. Medieval battles were less about glorious single combat and more about the brutal, bloody efficiency of overwhelming numbers and superior tactics. Knights, of course, participated, but they were often part of a larger formation, and individual heroism was frequently swamped by the tide of war. The chances of a knight facing off against another knight in a one-on-one duel, as so often depicted, were statistically low. It was far more likely that they be tangled in a chaotic mass of men, horses, and weapons, struggling for survival. The idea of chivalry itself is ripe for deconstruction. The word conjures images of gallant gentlemen treating women with respect and defending the weak. However, the historical record reveals a far more nuanced picture. While some knights may have adhered to ideals of courtesy and honor, these were often selectively applied, dependent on social standing and self-interest. Chivalry was as much a tool of political power as it was a moral code, a way to establish prestige and maintain social order amongst a highly stratified society. It was often used as a tool to justify conquest and maintain power structures, rather than as a genuine expression of moral goodness. Many acts that might be viewed as chivalrous in a modern context were actually driven by self-serving ambition or an attempt to maintain or enhance reputation and social standing. Think about the famous tournaments. These events, often depicted as noble competitions of skill and honor, were frequently brutal affairs, often resulting in serious injury or even death. Far from being fair fights, tournaments frequently involved underhanded tactics, bribery, and even outright cheating. The emphasis on personal glory and the advancement of one's social position often overshadowed any concerns about fairness or sportsmanship. These contests, more often than not, were less about honor and more about demonstrating prowess and claiming prestige, sometimes with deadly consequences. Let's not forget the less than savory aspects of medieval life. Hygiene was, to put it mildly, non-existent for many, including knights. The idea of a knight immaculately groomed and impeccably clean is a complete fantasy. Think about the combination of sweat, dirt, and the occasional unpleasant bodily function contained within that heavy armor. Add to this the scarcity of clean water and the prevailing ignorance about hygiene and sanitation, and it's easy to imagine the knight's rather pungent aroma. The image of shining armor is quickly replaced by the far less appealing image of a sweaty, dirty, and possibly smelly knight. Furthermore, the notion of the knight as a selfless defender of the weak is frequently contradicted by historical accounts. Knights were often involved in brutal acts of violence against civilians, often acting as enforcers of the ruling class. Their loyalty was frequently subject to the whims of their feudal lord, and their actions were often guided by self-interest rather than any broader sense of moral obligation. The idealized notion of a knight fighting for justice and the common good frequently clashes with the reality of knights engaged in acts of oppression and brutality. The noble knight might very well be the same man overseeing the oppression of serfs or engaging in the forceful collection of taxes. Furthermore, the economic realities of knighthood often clash with our romanticized notions. Knights weren't just noble warriors, they were often landowners, dependent on the labor of serfs and the productivity of their estates. Their wealth and social status were intertwined with the economic exploitation of others. The chivalric code was, in many ways, a means to uphold this system and maintain their privileged position within the social hierarchy. The idealistic image of the knight often ignores the harsh realities of feudalism and the power structures that underpinned it. The contrast between myth and reality extends beyond the individual knight. The very concept of a unified, cohesive chivalric order is largely a construct of later romanticization. Medieval society was fractured and decentralized. Knights owed allegiance to various lords and were often involved in internal conflicts as much as they were in external wars. The image of a unified army of knights marching together under a single banner is a simplification of a far more complex reality, a reality of competing factions and shifting alliances. Finally, let's not forget the role of religion. While knights were often associated with religious orders and piety, their actions didn't always reflect religious ideals. Religious fervor could fuel acts of violence and aggression, and the Crusades stand as a stark example of how religious zeal could be channeled into brutal conquests, often resulting in unspeakable atrocities. The idea of knights acting as devout servants of God often clashes with the violence and brutality that they were frequently involved in. In conclusion, the image of the medieval knight, as presented in popular culture, is far removed from the complex reality of medieval life. While there were undoubtedly individual knights who behaved with honor and courage, the romanticized ideal is a significant simplification of a far more nuanced and often disturbing reality. By stripping away the layers of romanticism, we can better appreciate the complexity and the often harsh realities of medieval society, a world where even the most revered figures were far more human and far less perfect than popular culture suggests. The medieval knight, far from being a symbol of unwavering honor and unwavering nobility, was often a flawed individual operating within a deeply flawed system. The gap between myth and reality is vast, a testament to the power of storytelling and our enduring fascination with the romanticized past. Let's move on from the romanticized knight to another staple of medieval imagery, the castle. Forget the Disney-fied turrets and perfectly manicured drawbridges. The reality of life within those imposing stone walls was far less picturesque, a chaotic blend of cramped quarters, questionable hygiene, and the ever-present threat of sudden, violent death. Think less Sleeping Beauty, more Lord of the Flies, with slightly better architecture, though that's debatable. Imagine stepping across the threshold of a medieval castle. The first thing that would hit you isn't the grandeur, it's the smell. Forget the lavender-scented sachets of modern times. This is a symphony of unwashed bodies, decaying food, animal waste, and whatever else happened to be fermenting in the dimly lit corners. Forget air conditioning. Even on a summer's day, the air inside would be thick and heavy with the dampness seeping from the stone walls. The concept of personal space was a laughable luxury. You'd be sharing your living quarters with a host of people ranging from fellow noblemen or women to servants, soldiers, and possibly even a few unwanted rodents. Privacy was a relic of a more advanced civilization. The castle's layout wasn't designed for comfort, it was designed for defense. Living spaces were frequently cramped and poorly lit, with thick stone walls offering little in the way of natural light or ventilation. Think of the rooms as functional boxes, designed more for storage and protection than aesthetics or living comforts. The Great Hall, the heart of the castle, served multiple purposes. It was dining room, meeting place, and sometimes even sleeping quarters for less privileged inhabitants. The noise levels would have been consistently high, a cacophony of daily life punctuated by the occasional shriek of terror or the clang of a battle cry. Now let's talk about sanitation. The absence of proper sanitation systems is not a subtle detail. It's a defining feature of the medieval castle experience. Waste disposal was, to put it delicately, primitive. Chamber pots were the norm, and their contents were often simply thrown out of windows, or at best, dumped into convenient latrines that usually sat just outside the castle walls, providing a delightful fragrance to the surrounding environment. The concept of a sewage system, or even basic waste management, was a significant technological leap away. The stench would be unrelenting, a constant reminder of the challenges of medieval hygiene. Remember, diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and cholera were prevalent, exacerbated by these conditions. Cleanliness wasn't simply next to godliness, it was a luxury beyond the reach of most castle dwellers. The castle's grandeur, therefore, was often built upon a foundation of grime and disease. And then there's the ever present threat of siege. Castles weren't built simply for comfort or status, their primary function was defense. Life within those walls was punctuated by the constant, low level anxiety of a potential attack. The sounds of approaching armies, the ominous thud of siege engines, the sight of burning villages on the horizon. These were everyday realities for those living within castle walls. Every crack in the masonry, every creak of the timbers might signify the beginning of the end. The residents weren't simply living in their homes, they were living in a fortress, constantly aware of the precariousness of their situation. Let's consider the castle kitchen. In the romanticized versions, we see feasts of roasted meats and flowing wine. The reality was often far less appealing. Food storage was a constant battle against spoilage, and preservation techniques were limited. The menu was likely repetitive and monotonous, heavily reliant on grains, vegetables, if available, and not already consumed by rodents, and whatever meat could be hunted or raised. Food preservation was a key concern. Salt, smoking, and pickling were commonly used, resulting in a cuisine that was often bland and lacking in the variety we enjoy today. Think about the castle's security features, specifically the defenses. The drawbridge, portcullis, and various other security mechanisms were certainly impressive, but they couldn't guarantee complete protection. A determined enemy could still find ways to breach the defenses. Consider the human element of defense. The castle's defenders faced long periods of boredom, interspersed with moments of intense terror. Morale would have fluctuated based on the threat level and the availability of decent food and drink. Now, let's compare a medieval castle to a modern building. The differences are vast. A modern building prioritizes comfort, functionality, and aesthetics. It has proper sanitation systems, ventilation, heating, and lighting. It's designed for individual privacy, and it's relatively safe from external threats. There's a world of difference between the experience of living in a medieval castle and the experience of living in a contemporary apartment or house. One offers a precarious existence filled with discomfort and danger. The other provides a degree of safety, comfort, and convenience unimaginable to medieval castle dwellers. We've all seen those idyllic paintings of castles, bathed in the golden light of a setting sun, with happy people milling about. These images are far from the grim reality. The castles weren't built for aesthetics. They were built for defense and survival. Their beauty, if any, was secondary to their practicality and resilience. Life inside these mighty fortresses was a constant negotiation between comfort, security, and the ever-present shadow of death. Consider the castle's impact on the surrounding landscape. A medieval castle wasn't just a building, it was the center of a local power structure. The surrounding land would likely bear the scars of the castle's construction and its military activities. The landscape would reflect the castle's impact on the lives of those living nearby, serfs, farmers, and others whose lives were inextricably linked to the castle's inhabitants. The castle's influence extended far beyond its stone walls. Consider the constant disruption caused by military movements, sieges, and the castle's overall dominance over the local community. It wasn't just a building, it was a complex ecosystem of power and influence. Finally, consider the social hierarchy within the castle. The noble lord or lady resided at the top, commanding resources and authority. Below them were various levels of nobility, soldiers, servants, and laborers, each with their own roles and responsibilities. The social hierarchy would have been sharply defined, influencing all aspects of life, from the food one ate to the space one occupied within the castle walls. This rigid social structure contributed to the atmosphere, creating tensions and conflicts that were a constant presence within the castle's confines. In summary, the idealized images of medieval castles that persist in popular culture are a far cry from the reality. The truth is far less romantic, far more visceral, and significantly more smelly. It was a world of limited sanitation, cramped living conditions, and the ever-present danger of attack. The castles were powerful symbols of authority and defense, but life within their walls was far from idyllic, a testament to the stark contrasts between the romanticized past and the harsh realities of the Middle Ages. By understanding the unsanitary conditions, the lack of privacy, and the constant threat of siege, we can begin to appreciate the immense changes that have occurred in architecture, living standards, and security since medieval times, prompting us to reflect on how far we've come in our understanding of sanitation, hygiene, and the fundamental necessities of life. Let's leave the stench of the castle behind and venture out into the countryside, a landscape often romanticized as idyllic, but which in reality was a battleground for survival. We're talking about the peasantry, the backbone of medieval society, the people who toiled in the fields to feed the lords and ladies lounging in their not so clean castles. Their lives weren't exactly a picturesque bucolic idyll. Forget the charming images of happy farmers. Their reality was far grittier, a constant struggle against hunger, disease, and the whims of nature and their overlords. A typical day for a medieval peasant began long before sunrise. The rooster's crow wasn't a gentle alarm, it was a battle cry announcing the start of another grueling day. The peasant family huddled together in their cramped, drafty cottage, a structure that would likely make even the most dilapidated modern shed seem luxurious, would rise and begin their chores. These weren't the leisurely chores of a weekend gardener. These were backbreaking tasks, performed under often harsh conditions, their reward being enough food to survive until the next day. Their breakfast, if one could call it that, was likely a meager portion of bread, perhaps some watery porridge if they were lucky. Meat was a luxury, a rare treat reserved for special occasions or holidays. Most of their diet consisted of grains, vegetables grown in their small plot of land, and whatever they could forage. The lack of refrigeration and preservation techniques meant that much of their food was seasonal, and the constant risk of spoilage meant that even a modest harvest was a precarious foundation for survival. The work itself was physically demanding, a cycle of back-breaking labor that began in the fields and continued throughout the day. Plowing, planting, weeding, harvesting, each task was performed with tools that would seem primitive, even by the standards of our ancestors. The pace was relentless, dictated by the seasons and the demands of their lord. They would labor under the scorching sun in summer and brave the freezing rain and snow in winter, their bodies weary and aching from the relentless physical exertion. The toil was constant, with little respite. The living conditions of medieval peasants were equally harsh. Their homes, often little more than one-room huts made of wattle and daub, a mixture of mud and woven sticks, or less substantial structures, offered little protection from the elements. The floors were often dirt, providing a breeding ground for insects and vermin. Furniture was sparse, limited to a few simple chairs and a crude table. The concept of privacy was largely non-existent. Families lived, sate, and slept in the same space, sharing their cramped quarters with their livestock and the ever-present threat of pests, including the inevitable rodents. Sanitation was non-existent, or at best rudimentary. The nearest body of water often doubled as their toilet, and any waste generated by the family was often disposed of in similar unsanitary ways. Disease was therefore rampant, with the ever-present threat of dysentery, cholera, and other illnesses that could wipe out entire families. Medical care, when available, was often primitive and ineffective. Herbal remedies and religious practices were the most common treatments. The peasants' clothing was similarly basic, made of coarse materials like wool or linen. The clothes would be patched and repaired time and time again, serving as a testament to their resilience and the limited resources available. The lack of sufficient clothing offered little protection against the elements, increasing their vulnerability to disease. The social structure imposed further hardships on the peasantry. They were at the bottom of the feudal system, bound to the land and subject to the whims of their lord. They were obligated to provide labor and a portion of their harvest in exchange for the privilege of living on the Lord's land. This meant they had little control over their lives or their destinies. Any attempt at improving their conditions was often met with harsh punishment. The concept of social mobility was largely non existent for the vast majority of peasants. The feudal system rigidly defined their position in society. They were born into a life of poverty and toil, and they were likely to die in the same condition, their prospects limited by birth and circumstance. The opportunities available to them were scarce, their access to education non existent, and their escape from the cycle of poverty almost inconceivable. A peasant's life was not only physically and emotionally arduous, it was also inherently dangerous. There was the constant threat of famine due to crop failures or natural disasters that could decimate an entire village. There was the danger of accidents, injuries during field work, and diseases. And of course, there was the ever-present threat of violence, local disputes, bandits, and even the Lord's own men were constant threats, creating a climate of fear and insecurity that overshadowed the peasants' lives. This life is a stark contrast to our modern reality. We have access to food, health care, education, and opportunities that were unimaginable to the medieval peasant. Our daily lives, while still having their challenges, are drastically different in terms of resource availability and our individual freedoms. It is easy for us, with our abundance of choices and relative safety, to overlook the incredible hardship endured by those who lived in the medieval period. We enjoy indoor plumbing, clean water, and abundant food, which weren't even remotely considered luxuries for them. The harsh realities of peasant life in the Middle Ages weren't just about the scarcity of material goods. It was also about a lack of control, autonomy, and freedom. Their lives were determined by external forces, the seasons, their lords, and the vagaries of fate, leaving little room for self-determination. This lack of control over their own lives further exacerbated the already precarious existence that they endured. The absence of choices and opportunities left them with a limited power to shape their destinies. The lack of education further solidified their position. Without literacy or even basic numerical skills, they were kept in a state of dependence, unable to navigate the intricacies of the legal system, manage their finances, or access information beyond their immediate surroundings. This intellectual deprivation reinforced the socio-economic stratification of medieval society. In conclusion, the romantic view of medieval peasant life often ignores the sheer brutality of daily existence. Their lives were a relentless struggle for survival, a battle fought against hunger, disease, poverty, and the rigid social structures that confined them to a life of toil and hardship. Understanding their harsh realities provides us not only with a deeper appreciation for the advancements of modern civilization, but also with a critical lens through which to examine our own assumptions about the past and the challenges faced by those who came before us. Their stories, though often untold and unseen, are crucial reminders of the long and arduous journey toward a life where basic necessities and human rights are no longer privileges, but fundamental rights. The grim realities of the medieval peasant are far removed from the idyllic imagery, highlighting the substantial progress made in social and economic spheres since then. Their stories underscore the fragility of life and the significance of the hard won progress that characterizes modern society. Now, let's shift our focus from the muddy fields and cramped cottages to something a bit closer to the body: clothing. Forget the flowing gowns and shining armor of Hollywood's medieval fantasies. The reality of medieval fashion was far less glamorous, a testament to practicality over aesthetics, dictated by necessity, climate, and social standing. Imagine a world where a well-made tunic was a luxury, and a hole in your hose wasn't a fashion statement, but a potential invitation to hypothermia. The materials used were largely determined by accessibility and climate. Wool was king, especially in northern Europe. Sheep were relatively easy to raise, and wool provided warmth and durability, perfect for the often harsh winters. Linen, made from flax, was also common, especially in warmer regions. It was cooler than wool, but not as durable, requiring more frequent mending. Cotton was a rarity, imported from warmer climates and therefore expensive, a true luxury item only accessible to the upper echelons of society. Silk, the ultimate status symbol, was practically non existent for the majority of the population, found only adorning the opulent robes of the wealthy. Forget the precision tailoring of modern clothing. Garments were largely made at home, often by the women of the household. Patterns were simple, functionality being prioritized over intricate designs. The tools available were rudimentary: needles, thread, shears, and the sewing process was painstakingly slow. Hemlines were not carefully measured. Garments were often adjusted through wear and tear, adapting to the owner's form over time. A perfectly fitting garment was more a matter of luck than of design. Clothing for the peasantry was, unsurprisingly, basic: a tunic, a simple, loose-fitting shirt that reached the knees, was the staple garment for both men and women. It was typically made of coarse wool or linen and served as both underwear and outerwear. Over the tunic, peasants might wear a cloak or mantle, providing extra warmth during colder months. Trousers or hose were also common, providing some protection from the cold and wet. Footwear was basic, often simple leather sandals or boots fashioned from scraps of material. Elaborate footwear was a privilege reserved for the aristocratic elite. The lack of personal hygiene standards impacted clothing choices. Bathing was not a regular occurrence for many, so garments tended to be less tightly fitted and made from materials that were easily washable, or at least allowed for easier airing out. Unlike modern times, the idea of changing undergarments daily was absurd. A peasant's clothing was a testament to their resilience, bearing the scars of daily labor, patched and repatched countless times. These clothes were lived in, not fashionably displayed. Social status was visibly reflected in clothing. The upper classes could afford finer materials, more elaborate designs, and more layers of clothing. The color of the fabric became an indicator of class. Rich, vibrant colors signaled wealth and status, while somber shades were the lot of the peasantry. The nobility adorned themselves with fur trims, gold embroidery, and luxurious jewels, showcasing their wealth and social standing. Their clothes were not merely garments, but a visible display of their power and privilege. A richly embroidered robe or a flowing silk gown was a statement, an announcement of one's elevated place in society. The contrast between the aristocratic wardrobe and that of the peasant was stark. A wealthy lord or lady might boast an array of finely tailored garments, changed regularly and adorned with jewelry and other accessories. Their wardrobe would be a collection of distinct pieces, each designed for a specific occasion or weather condition. Their shoes would be fashioned from fine leather, perhaps even adorned with embroidery or embellishments. Their undergarments, too, would be of finer materials, ensuring comfort and cleanliness. Furthermore, the production of clothing for the wealthy involved specialized skills and crafts. Tailors were highly skilled professionals, capable of creating intricate garments, and embroiderers and other artisans contributed to the opulent adornments of the nobility's wardrobes. The time and effort invested in creating clothing for the elite marked a stark contrast to the simple, homemade clothing of the peasant class. The disparity in clothing, therefore, became a powerful visual marker of the profound social and economic inequalities of medieval society. But the constraints imposed by material availability and the lack of advanced technologies impacted everyone. The absence of modern fabrics like cotton, nylon, or polyester limited the range of available materials. The techniques available for creating fabric were less sophisticated, resulting in coarser and less comfortable garments. Washing techniques were limited. Garments were often cleaned infrequently, leading to the buildup of dirt and even vermin. This impacted hygiene, comfort, and overall well-being across all social strata, despite differences in the quality of materials. The challenge of keeping warm in the harsh winter months was a significant concern for all. The lack of central heating in homes and buildings meant that clothing was the primary line of defense against the cold. The emphasis on layers of garments and heavy materials, such as thick wool and fur trims, reflects the importance of clothing in maintaining body temperature. The absence of sophisticated insulation materials further underlines the importance of clothing as a primary source of protection from the elements. The absence of modern manufacturing techniques meant that the creation of clothing was time-consuming and labor-intensive. The process of creating cloth, from shearing sheep to weaving the wool, involved many steps and hours of work. Similarly, the creation of garments, from cutting patterns to sewing and embellishing, also took considerable time and effort. This contrasts sharply with the speed and efficiency of modern clothing production. The high cost and time commitment associated with medieval clothing production highlights the value and significance placed on garments, regardless of social class. In the absence of modern washing machines and dryers, the cleaning of clothes was a laborious process. Garments were often washed by hand in cold water, requiring significant physical effort. The process was slow and time-consuming and required special attention in order to prevent damage to the clothes. Moreover, the limited availability of soap and other cleaning agents further hindered the efficacy of the washing process. This contrast emphasizes the difficulty in maintaining cleanliness and hygiene, despite the widespread need for sanitation and personal cleanliness. In conclusion, Medieval fashion, devoid of the romanticism often attached to it, was a pragmatic response to the limitations of the time. The garments worn, from the coarse tunics of the peasants to the more ornate robes of the nobility, reflect a blend of material availability, social status, and the constant need to survive the harsh realities of a pre-industrial world. The lack of technology and sophisticated production processes impacted everyone, irrespective of their social standing, but this impact was more profound for the peasant class. Their clothing served as a daily reminder of their limited resources and the constant struggle for survival. Comparing medieval fashion to our own highlights, not only the advancement in technology and manufacturing processes, but also the significant shift in societal values and priorities. The practical nature of clothing in the medieval period was dictated by survival, not aesthetics. The narrative that emerges is one of stark contrast and fascinating reflection on the evolution of clothing and the societies that wore them. Now, let's move from the often patchy and perpetually unclean world of medieval clothing to a subject that was perhaps surprisingly even less appealing. Food. Forget the romanticized feasts of Hollywood epics. The reality of the medieval diet was a far cry from the groaning boards laden with roasted meats and glistening pastries. Instead, picture a landscape dominated by a monotonous cycle of grains, vegetables, and the occasional grudgingly provided piece of meat. Quantity, not quality, was the name of the game, a culinary philosophy that would leave even the most dedicated foodie utterly bereft. The cornerstone of the medieval diet, particularly for the peasantry, was bread, not the fluffy, crusty loaves we enjoy today, but rather a dense, often heavy concoction made from whatever grains were available. Rye, barley, and oats were common, with wheat being a relative luxury. The quality of the bread varied wildly, depending on the harvest and the miller's skill or lack thereof. Imagine a bread so coarse it could double as a weapon, so hard it required a significant amount of chewing, a culinary challenge akin to tackling a particularly stubborn piece of flint. Molds, weevils, and other unwanted guests were frequent companions in the humble loaf, a testament to the limitations of preservation techniques. Vegetables played a significant role in the medieval diet, but again, variety was sadly lacking. Cabbage, turnips, onions, and leeks were staples, providing much needed nutrients and filling bulk to the meager meals. Peas and beans were also cultivated, though the yield could be unpredictable. Herbs were used liberally, both to add flavor and, just as importantly, to mask the taste of spoiled or otherwise less than ideal ingredients. Garlic, in particular, enjoyed a prominent place in medieval cooking, serving as both a culinary spice and a much-needed prophylactic against disease, though one wonders if its powerful aroma may have occasionally been preferred to the alternative. Meat, a coveted commodity, was a rare treat for most. Pork was the most commonly consumed meat, owing to the relative ease of raising pigs. Beef and mutton were also eaten, but their consumption was often dictated by the availability of grazing land. Poultry, such as chickens and geese, were also part of the diet, though they could be more expensive than pork due to their longer growing times. Game, such as venison and rabbit, was hunted, but this was usually a privilege enjoyed by the wealthy or the skilled hunters among the peasantry. Fish, particularly in coastal regions, provided a valuable source of protein. The preservation of meat was a constant challenge. Salting, smoking, and drying were the primary methods employed, though they were far from foolproof, and food spoilage was a constant threat. Dairy products were another staple, though again not in the abundance we see today. Milk, cheese, and butter were common, but they could be unpredictable in both quantity and quality, heavily influenced by seasonal fluctuations in milk production. Cheese, in particular, held a special place in the medieval diet. It was easy to store and transport, lasting longer than fresh milk. But imagine a cheese, aged without refrigeration, with a pungent aroma that could clear a room or a village. One imagines the process of cheese making was more akin to a biological experiment than a carefully controlled culinary endeavor. Fruits were less readily available due to limitations in cultivation and preservation. Apples, pears, and plums were common in some regions, but their availability was heavily seasonal. Nuts, such as hazelnuts and walnuts, were gathered, providing a valuable source of calories and nutrients. Honey served as the primary sweetener long before refined sugar became readily available. This was not the subtly sweet honey we are familiar with today. One imagines the medieval version had a bolder, earthier flavor, far less refined. The preparation methods of medieval cuisine were simple, owing to the limited technology available. Roasting, boiling, and stewing were the primary techniques employed. Spices were used sparingly, their high cost often reserving them for the upper classes. Salt was another crucial ingredient, playing a crucial role in preserving food, as well as adding flavor. However, even salt could be a luxury item for the poor, leading to a reliance on preservation methods that were, shall we say, less than ideal. The lack of refrigeration meant that food spoilage was a constant concern. Meat, dairy products, and even vegetables could quickly become unfit for consumption, especially during warmer months. This led to a high reliance on preserving methods like salting, smoking, and drying, methods that could alter the texture and taste of the food, not to mention posing risks of bacterial contamination. One wonders if the common medieval complaints of digestive issues were simply a byproduct of the less than stellar methods employed in food preservation. Food safety was another significant concern. The lack of understanding of hygiene and sanitation meant that food could be easily contaminated with bacteria, parasites, and other pathogens. The unsanitary conditions prevalent in many medieval kitchens and food preparation areas only heightened this risk. The lack of effective preservation methods, the reliance on questionable ingredients, and the generally unsanitary conditions meant the risk of food poisoning and various intestinal illnesses was significantly higher than what we experience today. The social aspect of medieval dining reflected the vast social hierarchy of the time. The wealthy enjoyed elaborate feasts with a wide variety of dishes and a plentiful supply of meat, wine, and spices. These feasts were not merely occasions for sustenance, but also events of political and social significance, showcasing the wealth and power of the host. One imagines the sheer volume of food would be enough to inspire either extreme awe or profound indigestion, depending on one's constitution. In stark contrast, the peasantry's meals were simple, monotonous, and often meager. Bread, vegetables, and the occasional piece of meat were the typical fare. Meals were often eaten communally, with families sharing a single pot of stew or a loaf of bread. The scarcity of food and the constant struggle for survival led to a focus on quantity rather than quality. The difference between the rich and the poor was not just in the variety or quality of food available, but also in the sheer quantity, a stark representation of the profound social inequalities prevalent in medieval society. Comparing the medieval diet to our modern diet reveals a remarkable transformation in food availability, quality, and safety. The variety and abundance of food we enjoy today are a luxury that would have been unimaginable to our medieval ancestors. The improvements in food production, preservation, and transportation have significantly enhanced both the quality and safety of our food supply, leading to a dramatically improved overall health. While our modern obsession with specific diets might at times feel restrictive, it's a far cry from the limitations imposed by scarcity and the lack of sanitation in medieval times. The medieval diet, then, offers a fascinating case study in the interaction between culture, technology, and sustenance. It's a stark reminder of how much our world has changed and how much we truly owe to advances in agriculture, sanitation, and food preservation that have lifted us, collectively, from the often literal edge of starvation. The often grim reality of medieval food stands in stark contrast to our modern abundance, a contrast that underlines the remarkable progress and surprisingly frequent lapses in hygiene of human civilization. The next time you complain about the lack of variety in your lunch options, take a moment to consider the culinary challenges faced by our medieval forebears and be thankful for the fridge. Chapter 4, Lessons from the Past, or Why We Should Be Grateful. Now, having traversed the treacherous terrain of medieval gastronomy, let's delve into a realm even more fraught with peril: hygiene and sanitation. If the medieval diet was a culinary gamble, then medieval hygiene was a game of Russian roulette played with a loaded chamber and a blindfold. The very notion of personal cleanliness, as we understand it today, was largely absent from the medieval worldview. Bathing, for instance, was not the relaxing ritual of self-care we know. Instead, it was a potentially dangerous activity, fraught with risks and often avoided altogether. The prevailing belief was that opening one's pores to water made one more susceptible to disease, a theory that certainly made life easier for the less than industrious. The concept of cleanliness differed drastically from our modern perspective. For most, it simply meant removing the most visible grime. Running water was a luxury available only to the wealthiest, while the majority relied on whatever water sources were available, often rivers, streams, or wells contaminated with sewage and other undesirable substances. Imagine the refreshing taste of water that doubled as a convenient sewage disposal system. This lack of access to clean water directly impacted sanitation. Waste disposal was rudimentary, to put it mildly. The streets of medieval towns and cities were often open sewers, a swirling miasma of human and animal waste, garbage, and stagnant water. Imagine navigating a labyrinthine city where every step was a potential encounter with a particularly pungent offering from nature: rats, fleas, and other vermin thrived in these unsanitary conditions, serving as vectors for diseases such as the bubonic plague, typhus, and cholera. The stench alone must have been a constant assault on the senses, a far cry from our modern concerns about air fresheners and scented candles. The situation within homes was hardly better. Many homes lacked even the most basic sanitation facilities. Human waste was often disposed of directly onto the ground within the house itself or simply thrown out of the window, resulting in a constant, almost overwhelming aroma of decay. The floors of most homes were dirt floors, contributing to the overall unsanitary environment. Cleaning, if it happened at all, usually involved sweeping away the most visible debris, and the less said about the cleansing effect of these methods, the better. The lack of understanding of germ theory contributed significantly to the appalling sanitary conditions. People had no idea that microscopic organisms were responsible for the spread of diseases. Thus, even attempts at cleaning were often ineffective because they did not address the root causes of illness. Imagine the puzzled expression on someone's face as they diligently scrubbed the filth away, only to be struck down by some deadly plague, a clear case of, as they'd say, cleaning being not quite enough. The effects of these conditions on public health were catastrophic. Epidemics were commonplace, regularly devastating populations. The Black Death, of course, stands as the most infamous example, wiping out a significant portion of Europe's population in the 14th century. The disease spread rapidly through the unsanitary conditions and lack of understanding of disease transmission, creating a devastating domino effect. But the Black Death was far from unique. Numerous other outbreaks of disease decimated medieval communities, a grim reminder of the constant threat to life hanging over medieval people. The medieval approach to hygiene and sanitation might seem utterly barbaric, but this was an age before the understanding of pathogens, immunology, and the intricate relationship between filth and sickness. Progress toward a healthier environment was excruciatingly slow. Early attempts at public health initiatives were limited and largely ineffective. The lack of scientific knowledge and a very, very low average lifespan contributed to a very passive attitude toward sanitation. One might almost say a fatalistic acceptance that disease was merely an inevitable part of life. The Renaissance and subsequent Enlightenment began to gradually change this. The scientific revolution brought about a newfound understanding of the natural world, including the role of germs in causing disease. This new knowledge began to influence approaches to hygiene and sanitation, although change was initially very slow and uneven. The concept of quarantine, for example, although rudimentary, began to emerge as a method of controlling disease spread, though it relied as much on superstition as science for a while. The 19th century witnessed significant breakthroughs in understanding the causes of disease. Scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch made groundbreaking discoveries, revealing the role of microbes in disease transmission. These discoveries led to advancements in sanitation practices, including the development of germ-killing disinfectants and the implementation of public health measures such as sewage treatment and clean water systems. The sheer volume of deaths from illnesses like cholera spurred societies towards sanitation as a public health priority. The development of modern sewage systems in the late 19th and early 20th centuries marked a watershed moment in public health. These systems diverted sewage away from drinking water sources, drastically reducing the spread of waterborne diseases. The construction of these systems, often massive undertaking in their day, was a testament to the growing understanding of the link between sanitation and public health. It was the beginning of a new era of public health engineering. The 20th century saw further advancements in hygiene and sanitation, with the widespread adoption of practices such as hand washing, vaccination, and the use of antibiotics. These advancements significantly reduced the incidence of infectious diseases, leading to dramatic improvements in life expectancy and overall quality of life. The improvements in hygiene are so subtle, so integrated into our everyday lives, that we tend to forget how comparatively miraculous the state of hygiene is, and how devastating illnesses were during those times. The eradication of smallpox, for instance, was a monumental achievement, showcasing the power of public health interventions. However, even in the 21st century, challenges remain. Access to clean water and sanitation remains a significant problem in many parts of the world. Millions of people lack access to basic sanitation facilities, leading to continued high rates of waterborne diseases. The ongoing global health challenges are a powerful reminder that while incredible progress has been made, there is still a long way to go to achieve universal access to safe and clean water and sanitation. Modern issues of antibiotic resistance, hygiene in food production, and emerging infectious diseases serve as an ongoing reminder that public health requires constant vigilance and adaptation. Comparing the medieval approach to hygiene to our modern standards reveals a stark contrast. The advancements made in public health and disease prevention are nothing short of remarkable, dramatically improving life expectancy and quality of life. The story of hygiene and sanitation is a story of progress, punctuated by setbacks, and a constant reminder that even in an age of advanced technology, the pursuit of clean water and effective sanitation remains a critical global health challenge. The journey from the fetid streets of medieval towns to our modern world of relative cleanliness is a testament to the power of scientific discovery, social progress, and the constant need for vigilance in protecting public health. It is a journey that underscores, perhaps more powerfully than anything else, how fortunate we are to live in this particular moment, despite the myriad other problems facing us. And so, the next time you reach for that bottle of hand sanitizer, take a moment to appreciate the astonishing journey of human ingenuity and its fight against the enduring menace of germs, a battle that, despite enormous progress, is far from over. Now, having wrestled with the grim realities of medieval hygiene, let's turn our attention to a subject that, while equally perilous in those days, inspires a different kind of awe: medicine. If the medieval approach to sanitation resembled a slapstick comedy of errors, medieval medicine was more like a macabre tragedy played out in dimly lit apothecaries and fetid hospital wards. Forget the image of the kindly physician with a reassuring bedside manner. Medieval medical practice was often a chaotic blend of superstition, guesswork, and procedures that would make a modern medical student faint. The understanding of the human body was, to put it mildly, rudimentary. The dominant medical theories were largely based on the ancient Greek humoral theory, which posited that the body was composed of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was believed to be caused by an imbalance of these humors, and treatment often involved attempts to restore this balance through methods such as bloodletting, purging, and the application of leeches. Imagine the sheer terror of a patient facing a physician wielding a bloodletting lance, all in an effort to rebalance their humors. The sheer number of people who perished from bloodletting alone is a testament to the dubious efficacy of this popular treatment. Surgical techniques were equally primitive. Anesthesia, as we understand it, was non existent. Pain management often involved alcohol, or simply gritted teeth and fervent prayers. Surgical instruments were often crude, poorly sterilized, and prone to causing more harm than good. Infection was a constant threat, and the mortality rate from even minor surgical procedures was astonishingly high. A simple operation could easily turn into a deadly dance with infection, a grim reminder of the lack of understanding of asepsis. Diagnosis was often based on observation and intuition, with little reliance on scientific methods. Physicians would often assess a patient's condition based on their symptoms, their pulse, and their complexion. The absence of sophisticated diagnostic tools meant that many illnesses were either misdiagnosed or went undiagnosed entirely, leading to delayed or ineffective treatment. Indeed, many symptoms were interpreted through the lens of astrological or even religious beliefs, making diagnosis a complex blend of science, guesswork, and the whims of fate. The pharmaceutical landscape was just as bizarre. Medieval apothecaries dispensed a mixture of herbs, minerals, and other substances, many of which were completely ineffective, or worse, actively harmful. Recipes were often passed down through generations, with little scientific basis for their efficacy. The use of potentially toxic substances, such as arsenic and mercury, was commonplace, adding another layer of risk to the already perilous medical treatments. Imagine the pharmacist proudly presenting a potion containing a healthy dose of something that would now land them in prison. The most infamous example of medieval medical folly is perhaps the widespread belief in the efficacy of bloodletting. This procedure, which involved removing blood from a patient's body, was used to treat a wide range of ailments, despite its questionable effectiveness and the significant risk of causing death through blood loss or infection. Bloodletting was considered a treatment for everything from headaches to the plague. The sheer number of people who died from blood loss due to unnecessary bloodletting is almost unbelievable. Despite the often absurd nature of medieval medical practices, there were glimmers of progress. The works of ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen were still studied, providing a framework for medical understanding, although often misinterpreted or misapplied. Hospitals, though rudimentary by modern standards, did exist, providing a place for the sick and injured to receive sometimes care. Monasteries, too, often played a crucial role in caring for the sick and injured, providing a level of care often surpassing what was available in secular settings. The real revolution in medicine began in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution brought about a new emphasis on observation, experimentation, and the systematic study of the natural world. The development of the printing press allowed for the wider dissemination of medical knowledge, challenging traditional medical theories and promoting critical thinking. Anatomy, once a forbidden field of study, was now researched through dissections, finally providing a better understanding of the human body. William Harvey's discovery of the circulatory system in the 17th century was a landmark achievement, demonstrating the power of scientific investigation to overturn long-held beliefs. The 18th and 19th centuries saw the rise of modern medicine as we know it. The development of the microscope allowed for the discovery of microorganisms, revolutionizing the understanding of infectious diseases. Scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch made groundbreaking discoveries in microbiology, identifying the causes of many infectious diseases and developing methods to prevent their spread. The development of germ theory dramatically shifted medical practices, leading to the implementation of antiseptic techniques and a new emphasis on hygiene. The development of vaccines was another pivotal moment. Edward Jenner's pioneering work on smallpox vaccination in the late 18th century marked the beginning of a new era in disease prevention. The development and widespread use of vaccines has since saved millions of lives, dramatically reducing the incidence of previously deadly infectious diseases. Imagine the sheer relief of a population seeing smallpox, a disease that had ravaged humanity for centuries, virtually eradicated. The discovery of antibiotics in the 20th century was another watershed moment. The development of penicillin and other antibiotics revolutionized the treatment of bacterial infections, dramatically reducing mortality rates from diseases such as pneumonia, meningitis, and sepsis. The impact of antibiotics on human health has been immense, prolonging life and improving its quality in countless ways. It's hard to grasp the transformative effect of something as seemingly simple as antibiotics until one considers the death tolls before their widespread application. The 20th and 21st centuries have witnessed an explosion of medical advancements, including the development of new surgical techniques, diagnostic tools, and life-saving treatments. Organ transplantation, heart surgery, and cancer therapies have all dramatically improved outcomes and extended life expectancy. The development of medical imaging techniques, such as X-rays, CT scans, and MRI, has revolutionized diagnosis and treatment, allowing for the early detection and more effective management of a wide range of diseases. Medical progress continues at a remarkable pace. Researchers are constantly developing new treatments and cures for diseases, pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge and improving human health. The development of new vaccines, gene therapies, and personalized medicine are just a few examples of the ongoing quest to improve human health. Despite this remarkable progress, challenges remain. The rise of antibiotic resistance is a significant threat to public health, underscoring the need for new approaches to infection control. The emergence of new infectious diseases, such as HIV/AIDS and COVID-19, highlights the constant need for vigilance and rapid response. The continuing disparities in access to health care remain a persistent and deeply disturbing problem around the world. The ongoing battle against cancer and other chronic diseases continues to challenge medical researchers, urging a constant search for better therapies and preventive measures. In conclusion, the journey from the crude medical practices of the Middle Ages to the sophisticated medical technologies of today is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and perseverance. The advancements made in medicine and public health are nothing short of extraordinary, dramatically improving life expectancy and overall quality of life. While we still face formidable challenges, the progress made gives us hope for a future where medicine can conquer even more of the diseases that plague humanity. The sheer contrast between the past and the present should make us immensely grateful for the advancements in medical science, an incredible odyssey of human achievement against overwhelming odds, and perhaps inspire us to continue supporting research that ensures this incredible journey continues. Now, having contemplated the medieval medical landscape, a chaotic blend of leeches, questionable potions, and a concerning lack of hygiene, let's shift our gaze to another aspect of daily life that would leave a modern person utterly bewildered: transportation. Forget sleek automobiles, high-speed trains, and even the humble bicycle. Medieval transportation was a thrilling, often perilous, and frequently comedic affair. Imagine, if you will, a world where your commute could easily involve a perilous encounter with bandits, a sudden downpour transforming the road into a treacherous bog, or a seemingly innocuous animal dropping a rather unfortunate surprise onto your already muddy path. The primary mode of transportation for most people in the Middle Ages was, of course, walking. This was not the leisurely stroll through a park. This was often a grueling trek across muddy tracks, uneven cobblestones, or rough, barely defined trails. The speed at which one could travel was dictated by the condition of the paths, the terrain, and the simple fact of human endurance. Journeys that would take us a few hours by car could easily consume an entire day, or even several, depending on the distance and the conditions. And forget about any kind of scheduled transport system. If you wanted to get somewhere, you walked, rode, or maybe, if you were exceptionally lucky, hitched a ride. For those who weren't walking, riding an animal, usually a horse, donkey, or mule, was the next most common mode of travel. This was hardly the romantic gallop across open fields often portrayed in literature. The reality was often far more mundane and potentially hazardous. Imagine trying to navigate a crowded medieval street, overflowing with refuse, animals, and people on horseback. The animals themselves could be temperamental, prone to sudden spooks, and not always reliable. Add to this the appalling condition of the roads, the lack of proper harnessing, and the ever-present risk of falling off, and you'll appreciate the sheer amount of skill and patience involved. Carriage travel, while offering a somewhat more comfortable option, came with its own set of challenges. Medieval carriages were often slow, cumbersome, and prone to break down. The suspension systems were rudimentary at best, and the ride was far from smooth. Journeys could be incredibly jolting, leaving passengers bruised and exhausted long before they reached their destination. And let's not forget the lack of any real road network, meaning that travel times were significantly longer and the likelihood of encountering mud, potholes, or bandits was significantly higher. A simple carriage trip could easily become an adventure, in the truest sense of the word. Water transport played a significant role, particularly in coastal regions and along navigable rivers. Ships and boats were used for both passenger and freight transport, although they were significantly slower than their modern counterparts. The unpredictability of the weather, the possibility of storms and pirates, and the potential dangers of navigation on unfamiliar waters made voyages extremely risky. Even short river journeys could be fraught with danger, particularly in the face of unexpected storms or rough waters. The lack of sophisticated navigational instruments meant that many journeys were made on faith and experience, with many ships lost to the unforgiving elements. Consider the sheer amount of time and effort required for even the simplest journey. For a merchant needing to transport goods to a distant market, the journey could easily consume weeks, months, or even longer, heavily influencing pricing and impacting business decisions. A journey that takes us hours by plane could have easily taken a medieval person weeks, and that journey would have been fraught with far more risk than even the most delayed modern flight. The social and economic consequences of these limited transport options were profound. The lack of efficient transportation meant that communities were often isolated, limiting trade and cultural exchange. The cost of transporting goods was extremely high, impacting the price of goods and limiting access to certain items for those in more remote areas. The time needed to travel also significantly hindered mobility for people, limiting their ability to seek work, education, or medical care outside their immediate surroundings. The contrast between medieval transportation and our modern systems is stark and utterly transformative. The invention of the steam engine, the internal combustion engine, and the development of sophisticated infrastructure networks, railroads, highways, and airways, have revolutionized the way we move ourselves and goods. We can travel vast distances in a fraction of the time it would have taken our medieval counterparts. Modern transport systems are also dramatically safer, with significantly reduced mortality rates compared to the dangers inherent in medieval travel. The social and economic consequences of this revolution have been equally significant. Modern transportation networks have facilitated globalization, creating interconnected societies and economies. The ability to quickly and efficiently transport goods has led to lower costs, increased consumer choice, and economic growth. The ease of travel has also dramatically increased social mobility, allowing people to move freely to seek better opportunities and experience different cultures. Yet, even with all the astounding advancements, challenges persist. The environmental impact of modern transportation systems is a growing concern, with transportation being a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. The development of sustainable transportation solutions, such as electric vehicles, improved public transport, and cycling infrastructure, is crucial to mitigating the environmental impact of our mobility. Congestion in urban areas continues to be a significant problem, impacting traffic flow and contributing to air pollution. Addressing these challenges requires innovative solutions and investment in infrastructure to create truly efficient and sustainable transportation systems. The journey from the perilous and unpredictable world of medieval transportation to the seemingly effortless mobility of the modern era is a testament to human ingenuity and our constant striving for progress. Our modern transportation systems, though still imperfect, represent an incredible leap forward, enabling social and economic advancement on a scale unimaginable to our medieval predecessors. As we look towards the future, the challenge lies in leveraging our technological advancements to create transportation systems that are not only efficient and safe, but also sustainable and equitable for all. And as we effortlessly speed down a highway or board a plane, let us remember the bumpy, perilous, and often absurd journeys of our ancestors, a reminder of the incredible progress we've made and the challenges we still need to overcome. Now, having survived, in our imaginations at least, the perils of medieval transportation, let's delve into a topic that truly holds the key to survival: food. Forget the romanticized images of hearty feasts in grand castles. The reality of medieval food security was a precarious tightrope walk between starvation and barely adequate sustenance. Imagine a world where a bad harvest could mean widespread famine, where food spoilage was a constant threat, and where the simple act of obtaining enough calories to survive demanded a Herculean effort. The medieval agricultural system, while far from efficient by modern standards, was intricately woven into the fabric of daily life. The vast majority of the population were peasant farmers, toiling relentlessly to cultivate the land, often using rudimentary tools and techniques. Crop yields were low and unpredictable, heavily reliant on the vagaries of the weather. A single season of drought or a sudden frost could wipe out an entire harvest, leading to widespread suffering and even death. This inherent unpredictability created a constant anxiety around food security, an anxiety that permeated every aspect of medieval society. The lack of effective food preservation techniques exacerbated the issue. Before the advent of refrigeration, food preservation was primarily reliant on techniques such as salting, smoking, drying, and pickling. These methods, while effective to a degree, significantly limited the variety and availability of fresh food, particularly during the winter months. The result was a diet heavily reliant on grains, vegetables that could be stored, and whatever meat could be preserved. Fresh fruits and vegetables were luxuries available primarily to the wealthy. The concept of a balanced diet as we understand it today would have been largely alien to medieval people. Nutrient deficiencies were common, leading to widespread health problems. Scurvy, rickets, and other diseases were rampant, fueled by a lack of access to essential vitamins and minerals. Meat, when available, was often a treat reserved for special occasions or the wealthy. For most people, the daily diet was a monotonous cycle of bread, gruel, and whatever meager vegetables could be grown or harvested. Imagine the sheer effort required to obtain even a basic meal. The relentless cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting crops demanded backbreaking labor, often carried out under harsh conditions. The process was further complicated by the constant threat of pests, diseases, and bad weather. The medieval peasant farmer lived a life of constant toil, with the ever-present threat of famine hanging over their heads. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was a matter of life and death. The distribution of food was also a complex and often inequitable affair. The feudal system, with its rigid hierarchy, meant that food resources were often concentrated in the hands of the elite. Landowners held significant power and control over food production, leaving many peasants dependent on their lords for sustenance. This system could easily lead to exploitation and hardship, particularly during periods of scarcity. Those at the bottom of the social ladder face the most significant risks, often suffering disproportionately during times of famine. The Middle Ages witnessed several devastating famines, highlighting the inherent fragility of the food system. These events often led to widespread social unrest, disease, and death. The sheer scale of the suffering is almost unimaginable, reminding us of the essential role of food security in maintaining social stability and human well being. The transition from this precarious medieval reality to the relative abundance of the modern world is a story of remarkable innovation and progress. The agricultural revolution, beginning in the 18th century, witnessed unprecedented advancements in farming techniques, crop yields, and food preservation. The invention of new tools and machinery, the development of improved crop varieties, and the application of scientific principles to agriculture dramatically increased food production. The development of refrigeration and canning technologies revolutionized food preservation. These innovations allowed for the storage and transport of fresh food over vast distances, significantly increasing the availability and variety of food options. The rise of mass production and efficient distribution networks further enhanced food access, ensuring that a wider range of products reached consumers across broader geographic areas. The impact of these advancements on public health was profound. Nutrient deficiencies decreased dramatically, leading to improvements in overall health and life expectancy. The rise of food science and nutrition played a critical role in understanding the nutritional needs of the human body and developing strategies to address widespread deficiencies. However, the journey towards food security is far from over. Despite significant progress, food insecurity remains a major global challenge. Factors such as climate change, population growth, and conflict continue to threaten food production and distribution. The unequal distribution of food resources also creates disparities in access to nutritious food, leaving vulnerable populations at risk. Ensuring that everyone has access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food remains a significant challenge. The pursuit of sustainable food systems is a key element of addressing food insecurity. This involves developing agricultural practices that are environmentally friendly, socially equitable, and economically viable. This requires a holistic approach that integrates environmental protection, social justice, and economic efficiency. The development of drought-resistant crops, efficient irrigation techniques, and sustainable land management practices are vital for building a resilient and sustainable food system. The challenge of food security in the 21st century extends beyond simply producing enough food. It encompasses issues of accessibility, affordability, and nutritional quality. Many people in the world lack access to nutritious food, either due to poverty, geographic isolation, or lack of infrastructure. Even in regions with ample food production, the distribution of food may be uneven, leaving some populations facing food insecurity while others enjoy abundance. The issue of food waste is also a major concern, with significant amounts of food lost or discarded at various stages of the supply chain. The contrast between the precarious food securities of the Middle Ages and the relative abundance of the modern world is stark and serves as a powerful testament to human ingenuity and resilience. However, the ongoing challenges in ensuring that everyone has access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food remind us that the quest for food security remains a constant and vital endeavor. As we enjoy the bounty of modern food production, let's remember the hardships endured by those who lived in a world where the simplest meal could represent a victory against overwhelming odds. The challenges of food security are a constant reminder of the fragility of our systems and the constant need for progress. So, there we have it. We've survived, in our minds at least, a day in the Middle Ages. We've dodged the plague, escaped the wrath of a grumpy lord, and somehow managed to find something vaguely resembling sustenance. And let's be honest, the sheer effort involved in simply staying alive should leave us utterly breathless. But amidst the muck and misery, a remarkable question emerges. Why are we still here, laughing about it? Why, after millennia of hardship and near constant peril, have we not only survived, but thrived? The answer, of course, isn't a simple one. It's not a single invention, a lucky break, or a divine intervention. Instead, it's a complex tapestry woven from countless threads of innovation, resilience, and just plain dumb luck. Let's consider, for instance, the humble toilet. Think back to those medieval latrines, the communal cesspools overflowing with, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to be anywhere near them during a heat wave. Now compare that to the modern marvel of indoor plumbing, a testament to centuries of progress in sanitation and public health, a marvel so commonplace we barely register its existence, let alone its life-saving implications. The simple act of turning on a tap and accessing clean, potable water is another profound difference. In the Middle Ages, access to clean water was a luxury, a constant struggle, a battle against disease-carrying microorganisms. Think of the countless lives lost to waterborne illnesses, a stark reminder of the fragility of life in an age before water purification and modern sanitation. Our modern water systems are not just plumbing. They are a testament to engineering ingenuity and a commitment to public health, a monumental achievement that underpins our modern way of life. Let's consider the dramatic shift in medicine. Imagine stumbling upon a medieval apothecary, a dimly lit room filled with herbs and concoctions of dubious efficacy. The treatments available were often more likely to harm than to heal, a grim reminder of the limitations of medical knowledge in that era. Now picture a modern hospital, a place of sophisticated technology, advanced medical practices, and a wealth of knowledge built over centuries of research and innovation. The transformation is not merely a change in setting, but a complete revolution in the very understanding of human health and disease. Think of the sheer terror of childbirth in medieval times, the lack of sterile procedures, rudimentary understanding of anatomy, and generally appalling sanitation conditions made childbirth a high-stakes gamble. The maternal mortality rate was staggeringly high, a horrific reflection of the dangers faced by women in that period. Now consider the advances in modern obstetrics and gynecology, ensuring that birth is a vastly safer event, not a life-threatening trial. Consider, too, the almost unbelievable advancements in food production and distribution. We've already touched upon the precarious nature of medieval food security, a constant struggle against famine and malnutrition. The modern global food system, for all its imperfections, represents a monumental leap forward in providing food security on an unprecedented scale. The ability to transport fresh produce across continents, to cultivate crops adapted to diverse conditions, and to deploy sophisticated techniques to increase yields represents an astounding feat of human innovation. We can readily find fresh strawberries in the dead of winter, a fact that would have been inconceivable to our medieval predecessors. The difference between travel then and now is also staggering. Imagine the arduous journeys of medieval times, the risk of bandit attacks, the precariousness of travel by foot or horse. Today, we traverse continents in a matter of hours, and personal vehicles are commonplace. This is not just about convenience. It's about efficient mobility, economic growth, and increased accessibility to opportunities and resources. The list goes on. Improved housing, safer workplaces, increased life expectancy, and the eradication of diseases that once ravaged populations. Each of these advancements is a testament to the collective human endeavor, the product of generations of innovation, hard work, and a relentless pursuit of a better life. And yet, despite all this progress, there's a danger in complacency. The stark contrast between medieval life and our own can lead to a kind of historical amnesia, a forgetting of the struggle, the strife, the sheer brute force of effort it took to get to where we are today. We mustn't take these achievements for granted. We must remember the lessons of the past, not to dwell on the misery, but to appreciate the progress we've made and to recognize the ongoing challenges that remain. The world is far from perfect. Inequality, disease, and conflict still plague us. The appreciation of the modern world is not just about enjoying the creature comforts. It's about recognizing the responsibility that comes with progress. It's about acknowledging the struggles of those who came before us, the sacrifices they made, and the battles they fought. It's about using our understanding of history to build a more equitable, just, and sustainable future. Our privilege is not just a matter of personal comfort. It's a legacy we must continue to build upon, a responsibility to ensure that future generations don't have to endure the hardships of the past. The hard-won gains of centuries of progress must not be squandered. We must constantly strive to improve the world, remembering the lessons of history and the immense efforts of those who paved the way for our modern, comparatively comfortable existence. Perhaps the most important lesson from the Middle Ages is not just to appreciate our modern conveniences, but to recognize our shared humanity across time and circumstance, and to work towards a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, not merely survive. Let us not forget the lessons of the past, so we can truly appreciate the present and build a better future for all. For even a journey through the grimy streets of medieval life illuminates, albeit rather gruesomely, the path to a better tomorrow.